Chapter 1. After the dimensional storms a few decades ago, a large number of dimensional zones appeared all over the world. Gods, immortals, ghosts, monsters, angels, devils, pixies, and many other legendary dimensional creatures were discovered. Humans obtained their powers by hunting dimensional creatures. Uchiyobai, whose hair was already white, would look towards the corner of the last row of the classroom from time to time as he lectured. The other students were focused on the lecture, but the boy in the corner was using his textbook as a shield, sleeping soundly on the table. Occasionally, one could hear him snoring lightly. Uchiyobai shook his head slightly without anyone noticing as he sighed inwardly. So what if he's talented? If he can't withstand a little setback, how can he accomplish great things? Although the setback from that failure was quite a huge one, he really doesn't deserve the former principal's praise if he can't recover from it. Uchiyobai recalled what the former principal had said to him before his retirement. Looking at the boy sleeping soundly on the table with drool hanging from the corner of his mouth, he couldn't help but shake his head and sigh again. Chiyobai, I've seen many geniuses in my life. In summary, there are two types of geniuses. The former principal's eyes were very bright back then. Which two? Uchiyobai asked out of curiosity. One type of genius is Zhouwen, and the other type is other geniuses. Back then, the former principal's words left a deep impression on Uchiyobai. However, the student who had been praised so highly by the former principal had now degenerated into a person who didn't seek to improve himself. All he did was sleep in class and game on his phone after class. Uchiyobai had also attempted to motivate Zhouwen and get him to pull himself together, but after a few conversations, Zhouwen remained the same. He slept in class and gamed after class. He no longer cultivated diligently, as though he no longer had any desire to improve himself. Ring, ring. With the bell signaling the end of class, Uchiyobai saw Zhouwen, who was sleeping on the table, suddenly sit up in high spirits. He grabbed his phone and rushed out of the classroom without looking back. He couldn't help but feel disappointed as he muttered to himself with a sigh, "Former principal, I've already tried my best, but Zhouwen is a hopeless fool." Zhouwen jogged and quickly left the building, arriving at a secluded corner of the school. It wasn't that Zhouwen wasn't aware of how the teachers and other students looked at him, but he didn't take it to heart. Others believed that Zhouwen had abandoned himself to despair because he couldn't take the blow of failure. However, Zhouwen knew very well that he had never taken that failure to heart. The reason why he had abandoned himself to despair was something others couldn't understand, nor could he explain. After unlocking the phone screen, Zhouwen skillfully entered a game program named Ant Nest. Soon, the screen turned into a dark ant nest. In the winding passageways, there were many black ants crawling about. Looking around and seeing that no one was paying attention to him, he pricked his finger with a needle and dripped a drop of blood onto the phone screen. In the next second, a strange scene appeared. Zhouwen's drop of blood seeped through the phone screen and condensed into a blood-colored avatar in Ant Nest's game screen. Beside the blood-colored avatar was an introduction. Zhouwen, 16 years old, life level, mortal. Strength, 9 speed, 5 constitution, 8 essence energy, 4 primordial energy art, ascetic meditation primordial energy skill, none primordial energy pet. None ever since the dimensional storms. All sorts of dimensional lifeforms had appeared. They could be roughly divided into the 4 grades of mortal, legendary, epic, and mythical. Humans were at the lowest grade of mortal. By cultivating in primordial energy arts, one could enhance one's physique and evolve one's life grade. However, simply cultivating a primordial energy art to temper one's body resulted in an extremely slow evolution speed. By hunting dimensional creatures and plundering their dimensional crystals for one's own use, one could accelerate one's evolution. However, the places where dimensional creatures appeared were abnormally dangerous. Apart from regions that humans had already explored, entering other regions was almost certain death. Not everyone was willing to risk their lives. Furthermore, the Earth Federation had a clear rule that minors weren't allowed to enter dimensional zones. The ascetic meditation that Zhou cultivated was a type of primordial energy art. He cultivated primordial energy purely through ascetic cultivation without relying on any external forces. In the Federation, there were many geniuses who could cultivate primordial energy at the age of 16. However, there were probably only a handful of people like Zhou, who cultivated ascetic meditation to temper his body to produce primordial energy without relying on any external forces. In a small city like Guide City, he was the only one in history. Back then, all the teachers and students of Guide High School believed that Zhou would definitely accomplish great things in the future. But who knew that not long after that, a transfer student came to Guide High School and challenged Zhou. She defeated him in one strike, and it was a girl. It was also after that Zhou stopped cultivating diligently and gave up on himself. Others believed that Zhou was mentally weak and couldn't withstand setbacks, but only Zhou knew that his change had nothing to do with that failure. It was all because of the mysterious phone in his hand. Zhou looked down at the phone as he constantly controlled the blood-colored avatar to slay the black ants in the ant nest. Killed mortal creature, vigor ant. Killed mortal creature, vigor ant. Killed mortal creature, vigor ant. Every time Zhou killed an ant, a notification would appear on the screen as rows of notifications flashed rapidly. Ding! After killing an unknown number of vigor ants, he suddenly heard a clear sound. Then, a special notification appeared on the screen. Killed mortal creature, vigor ant discovered primordial energy crystal. Zhou focused his gaze and indeed, he saw a crystalline diamond-like crystal drop after a vigor ant was killed. On the crystal was the number 5. Zhou was delighted as he hurriedly controlled the blood-colored avatar to pick up the primordial energy crystal. When the primordial energy crystal touched the blood-colored avatar's finger, it immediately transformed into a strange aura that drilled into the blood-colored avatar's body. Almost at the same time, Zhou felt a force enter his body from the phone. Like an electric shock, it rapidly filled his body with primordial energy. The blood-colored avatar's primordial energy column also changed from 4 to 5. After dimensional creatures were killed, there was a certain chance that they would drop all sorts of crystals. The most common ones were strength, speed, constitution, and primordial energy crystals. Using strength crystals could enhance a human's strength. Using speed crystals could enhance one's speed. The other crystals had similar effects. However, in reality, crystals didn't display numbers. Humans couldn't see their stats either. After using strength crystals, they only knew that their strength had increased, but they didn't know by how much. Chapter 2. Ever since he obtained the phone, Zhou had been gaming to grind and obtain all sorts of dimensional crystals. In the past, his strength was 7, speed was 4, constitution was 7, and primordial energy was 1. During this period of time, he had obtained dimensional crystals by gaming, allowing him to raise his present value in just over a month. If it were in the past, he probably wouldn't have been able to improve so quickly even in a few years. After using a large number of dimensional crystals, Zhou discovered a pattern. Regardless of the type of dimensional crystal, if the dimensional crystal's value was greater than his own value would be raised to the same value as the dimensional crystal after using it. However, if the dimensional crystal's value was smaller or the same as his own, it could only be used as a form of energy replenishment. Only by cultivating a primordial energy art would he be able to raise his own value. It wouldn't directly raise his physique. This also meant that the higher the dimensional crystal's value, the better it was for Zhou. However, after killing vigor ants in the ant nest for so long, the highest value Zhou had seen was a strength crystal with a value of 9. The highest constitution crystal was 8, and the speed crystal was very low. Primordial energy crystals were extremely rare. Today, a level 5 primordial energy crystal drop. It was the highest grade primordial energy crystal he had ever seen. Zhou had considered the possibility that it had something to do with the Vigor Ant's talent. Vigor Ants had outstanding strength and constitution, but they weren't fast. Therefore, the strength crystals they dropped were of a higher grade. As for speed crystals, they were rare. However, even low-grade dimensional crystals could be used as energy replenishment to facilitate Zhou Wen's rapid cultivation of ascetic meditation. It wasn't completely useless. The only regret was that the crystals dropped in-game would be absorbed by the blood-colored avatar the moment it came into contact with them. They couldn't be brought into reality. Otherwise, just selling some low-grade crystals that he didn't need would be enough for him to lead a wealthy life. There were many ants in the ant nest, and after discovering the blood-colored avatar under Zhou Wen's control, more and more ants gathered. After killing more than 100 vigor ants, another dimensional crystal dropped, but it was only a level 3 strength crystal. It could only be used as an energy replenishment during cultivation. The drop rate of dimensional crystals wasn't high, and most of them were crystals below level 3. The higher the level, the lower the drop rate. All Zhou Wen could do was grind a large number of monsters to increase his chances of obtaining high-level dimensional crystals. This was also why he often slept in class and didn't cultivate. Apart from class time, he would be grinding monsters even at night. He didn't have the time or energy to listen to class or cultivate. Even so, his improvement speed was incomparable to before. If he were to purely cultivate ascetic meditation like before, he would need to spend at least several times or even dozens of times more time to raise his primordial energy to 5. As the number of vigor ants increased, Zhou Wen found it difficult to deal with them. Before long, the blood-colored avatar was drowned by the vigor ants as the game screen turned black. Zhou Wen had no choice but to restart the game and drip a drop of blood on the game screen. His blood was equivalent to a revival token in this game. A drop of blood was equivalent to a life. He entered the game once again and killed vigor ant after vigor ant. However, Zhou Wen's luck wasn't good this time. After killing more than 100 vigor ants, not a single dimensional crystal dropped. Zhou Wen had a calm temperament, so he wasn't anxious. He continued patiently grinding in the ant nest. Suddenly, Zhou Wen saw a special vigor ant appear in the midst of the vigor ant. The vigor ant was blood-red in color, as though it was dyed in blood. It was clearly different from the other black vigor ants around it. Furthermore, it was slightly bigger, allowing Zhou Wen to spot it at a glance. Seeing the red vigor ant rush out, Zhou Wen carefully probed it and soon discovered that the red vigor ant's strength and speed were much stronger than the black vigor ant. However, it was still within the range he could handle. After a series of maneuvers, the blood-colored avatar attacked the red vigor ant a few times, but it only dealt minimal damage and failed to kill it. However, he could still see that the red vigor ant's HP bar was slowly decreasing. It would probably take more than 100 attacks to kill it. Thankfully, the red vigor ant's speed was only slightly faster than the typical black vigor ant. The blood-colored avatar had sufficient time to maneuver and dodge, so killing it was only a matter of time. However, the number of black vigor ants kept increasing, worrying Zhou Wen. At this rate, he might be drowned by the ant swarm before he could kill the red vigor ant. However, he had no other choice. All Zhou Wen could do was try his best to control the blood-colored avatar and attack the red vigor ant as much as possible. As the red vigor ant's HP decreased and was about to hit rock bottom, the number of vigor ants around him increased. The blood-colored avatar had no room to maneuver. Gotcha! The blood-colored avatar failed to dodge in time and was bitten by a black vigor ant. Its HP immediately dropped by half. Zhou Wen knew that he couldn't hold on any longer. All he could do was control the blood-colored avatar and use the last of his strength to strike the red vigor ant. Boom! The punch struck the red vigor ant's vital spot. The last bit of its HP was taken away as its blood-red carapace suddenly burst open. 2 crystals burst out of its body. Zhouwen didn't have the time to check the stats of the two-dimensional crystals. He controlled the blood-colored avatar that was already low on HP to pick them up. Just as the blood-colored avatar picked up the two-dimensional crystals, it was drowned by the vigor ant swarm. Soon, the game screen went black. Zhouwen heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the two notifications appear on the game screen. He was already experienced. As long as he could pick up the dimensional crystals before he died, they would be useful to him. Killed mortal creature, mutated vigor ant discovered primordial energy crystal. Killed mortal creature, mutated vigor ant discovered vigor ant crystal. Zhouwen couldn't help but be taken aback when he saw the two notifications on the phone screen. He had seen many primordial energy crystals, but this was the first time he was seeing a dimensional crystal named after a vigor ant. After a moment of surprise, Zhouwen immediately reacted. Although he had never seen such a dimensional crystal before, he had heard of its existence. In school textbooks and videos on the internet, people had used similar crystals. However, they weren't vigor ant crystals, but other dimensional creatures. Chapter 3. A lightning-like force surged through Zhouwen's body. He was no stranger to this feeling. It was the same feeling he had when he absorbed the primordial energy crystal. However, this time it was more intense than any other time. It was many times more intense than when he absorbed the grade 5 primordial energy crystal. What level is this primordial energy crystal? Why is it so intense? Just as Zhouwen was pleasantly surprised, he felt another force surge into his body. It was different from the feeling of the primordial energy crystal. This force surged through his body like an electric snake, forcefully opening up his closed meridians and opening up a strange path. Indeed, the vigor ant crystal is the legendary primordial energy skill crystal. I wonder what the vigor ant's primordial energy skill is. Zhouwen was filled with anticipation. As the electric snake-like force circulated through his body, all of Zhouwen's primordial energy was stirred. It constantly circulated along the path opened up by the electric snake. Zhouwen was surprised to discover that as his primordial energy circulated, his hands turned as red as blood. They seemed to have a metallic luster and there was a strange swelling sensation. Although his palms didn't expand, Zhouwen felt as though there was a powerful force in his hands that was about to burst out of his palms. Now, Zhouwen had the urge to punch out, but he ultimately held it back. He was on campus and it wasn't good to cause a commotion. Furthermore, he would have to pay for damaging public property. After more than 10 minutes, the swelling gradually disappeared. His hands returned to normal and the primordial energy in his body stopped flowing. However, Zhouwen knew very well that the primordial energy burst technique had been deeply imprinted in his body and soul. It was as though it had become an instinct that he would never forget no matter what. Zhouwen eagerly looked at his phone and saw that the game interface had already turned black. He immediately restarted the game and dripped a drop of blood on it. When the in-game character appeared, he immediately checked the character's information. Zhouwen, 16 years lifeform level, mortal strength, 9 speed, 5 constitution, 8 primordial energy, 9 primordial energy art, ascetic meditation primordial energy skill, vigor divine fist, rank 7 companion beast. Nun Zhouwen was overjoyed. His primordial energy value soared to 9, meaning that the primordial energy crystal he had previously absorbed was a level 9 crystal. As for the rank 7 after vigor divine fist, it was similar to the rank 7 stat crystals. Without needing Zhouwen to cultivate it, Vigor Divine Fist had already reached a very high rank. As primordial energy skill crystals were relatively rare, they were rather expensive. However, with a primordial energy skill, one could use it to greatly enhance a particular aspect of one's abilities in a short period of time, producing combat strength that far exceeded one's own. It was an important means of life preservation and killing enemies. No one would complain about having too many primordial energy skills. In the past, Zhou didn't have the financial resources to buy primordial energy skill crystals. Furthermore, he was fully focused on cultivating ascetic meditation, so he didn't have the time or energy to practice primordial energy skills. This Vigor Divine Fist was his first primordial energy skill. From its name and effects, it was likely a technique that enhanced the strength of his fist. Indeed, the ant nest in-game is the same as the dimensional zones in real life. In that case, is it possible for companion beasts to drop in-game? Zhou felt a little excited. After entering the game to grind, his in-game character also had the Vigor Divine Fist skill. Zhou eagerly got his in-game character to use Vigor Divine Fist to see how powerful it was. Boom! The blood-colored avatar punched a Vigor ant's body, smashing its head into its body. Then, the entire ant's body exploded from the immense pressure. Its flesh and armor splattered everywhere, turning into a mangled corpse that littered the ground. Zhou was pleasantly surprised. The blood-colored avatar was equivalent to a clone of him. If the blood-colored avatar could produce such strength, he could similarly do the same in real life. Previously, he needed several punches to kill a Vigor ant, and that was under the condition of hitting a vital spot. Yet, Vigor Divine Fist could ignore the Vigor ant's carapace defense and directly cause its body to explode. The strength was truly astounding. However, although Vigor Divine Fist was powerful, it expended 4 primordial energy. Now, Zhou primordial energy limit was 9, so he could at most deliver 2 punches before his primordial energy was almost depleted. Although primordial energy could recover by itself, it was rather slow. Zhou could only recover 1 point every hour, far from keeping up with his expenditure. Of course, he could also use primordial energy crystals to rapidly recover his primordial energy. To the average person, that was an extremely extravagant method. Although he had obtained a primordial energy skill, he could only use it as a trump card for the time being. All Zhou could do was continue grinding in-game, hoping that something even more miraculous would drop. The process of grinding was undoubtedly very boring, but to a person who could hone his body and cultivate ascetic meditation to primordial energy before the age of 16, such a boring process was nothing. Just as Zhou was engrossed in grinding monsters with his phone in hand, he suddenly felt someone approach him. Looking up, he saw a tall girl in a high school uniform walking over. Zhou turned his head and looked around. There were usually no students here, and it was the same now. He was the only person in a radius of dozens of meters. It was also for this reason that he chose to game here. Fang Ruoshi, don't tell me she's looking for me? Zhou had no choice but to put away his phone when he saw the girl walk straight over. He didn't wish for others to see what was on his phone, or it might invite trouble. Fang Ruoshi was tall, about 1.75 meters tall. She wasn't considered short among boys her age, but she stood out among girls. Although she was tall, her body proportions were good. Coupled with her slender figure and the fact that she had been exercising for a long time, she didn't give off the impression that she was too big. Her slender thighs and exaggerated curves of her waist gave off a strong visual impact. It had a wild and primitive charm. It didn't match Fang Ruoshi's quiet name. She was a rather arrogant girl. Before the transfer student named Jing came, Fang Ruoshi and Zhou were the 2 most famous geniuses in Guide High School. However, the 2 of them weren't in the same class. Furthermore, they weren't good at making friends, and Zhou was fully focused on cultivating ascetic meditation, so he didn't have time to spare. Apart from a polite greeting, the 2 of them didn't have much interaction. Now, Fang Ruoshi was clearly here for Zhou, leaving him somewhat puzzled. He didn't know why she was looking for him. Chapter 4. The cultivation of primordial energy arts was extremely important in the Earth Federation's education system. Apart from the ordinary college entrance exam subjects, there was also a combat test. As the combat test had a certain level of danger, not all candidates needed to participate in it. The results of the combat test wouldn't be included in the college entrance exam's total score. Participation in the combat test was voluntary, but to apply for special schools, one needed the combat test's results as a standard. In the past decade, more and more famous schools had incorporated the combat test's results into their recruitment criteria. Of course, if one wanted to engage in work related to dimensional zones, the combat test's results were also a very good stepping stone. Although Zhou could obtain dimensional crystals from the cell phone and didn't need to risk his life in dimensional zones, he still planned on participating in the combat test and entering a specialized cultivation school to study. Furthermore, he would engage in work related to dimensional zones in the future. If Zhou didn't engage in any work related to dimensional zones, nor did he have a source or channel for dimensional crystals, it would be difficult for him to explain how he could grow and evolve so quickly. It would also be difficult for him to explain the possibility of obtaining companion beasts and other items in the future. Only when a diamond was mixed in a large crystal mine wouldn't attract attention. Zhou didn't wish to risk his life in dimensional zones, but he needed to engage in work related to them. At the very least, he needed to have a channel to obtain dimensional items. This way, he wouldn't attract suspicion when he used large amounts of dimensional crystals in the future. The combat test wasn't a one-on-one battle, but a team of 4. Apart from one's combat strength, the team's coordination and leadership skills would also affect the final result. If he was the only one to reach the end of the combat test, and the other 3 team members had to withdraw early or meet with an accident, his score would be greatly affected even if he performed well and obtained a high score. Zhou had a good reputation in Guide High School in the past. He was an ideal teammate, but in the past month, his image and reputation had plummeted. His abilities had also been greatly doubted. If it were any ordinary student seeking him to form a team, it would still be acceptable. But for a student like Feng Ruoxi, who had a chance of getting first in Guide City's combat test, there was no need for her to seek him out. In the past, Zhou was only famous because he cultivated in ascetic meditation. In terms of raw strength, Guide High School still had a few students who had cultivated primordial energy before the age of 16. However, unlike Zhou, they didn't rely on tempering themselves to cultivate primordial energy. They had more or less absorbed primordial energy crystals to supplement their cultivation. "Why did you team up with me?" Zhou asked Feng Ruoxi with interest. Feng Ruoxi's gaze met Zhou's. Her eyes were clear and cold, like an untainted icy spring. "I want to do my best to obtain high scores in the combat test, so I need powerful teammate." "And you have that kind of strength," Feng Ruoxi said calmly. "You should be talking about me from a month ago, right?" Zhou asked. Feng Ruoxi's eyes burned as she stared at Zhou. Her tone remained firm. "From my point of view, Zhou is Zhou. He has never changed. You are still the only person in Guide High School that I view as an opponent." Zhou was slightly taken aback. He never expected Feng Ruoxi to look at him in such a manner. He felt an indescribable strange emotion. "What do you mean by saying that to Enjing?" Zhou said in a self-deprecating manner. Although he didn't mind Enjing defeating him, he had to admit that Enjing was indeed much stronger than him. Feng Ruoxi sighed and said, "That's why I said that you are the only person in Guide High School that I view as an opponent. Enjing doesn't belong here, nor will she be taking the college entrance exam here." "What do you mean?" Zhou was slightly taken aback. "Don't you know? She's already transferred schools." Feng Ruoxi paused for a moment before continuing. "Although I don't know Enjing's origins, I'm certain that she has already surpassed the mortal stage. To be able to reach such a level at her age means that her background isn't simple. And with that strength of hers, there's no need for her to take the initiative to challenge you. Furthermore, her arrival and departure were so sudden. It feels like she came specially to beat you up." I thought you already knew her and had a grudge with her. Zhou hadn't thought too much about it before, but now that he thought about it carefully, it did seem to be the case. However, he was certain that he had never seen Jing before, much less had a grudge with her. How is that possible? I've never seen her before, so it's impossible for me to have a grudge with her. Zhou carefully recalled for a while, but he couldn't figure out how he could have a grudge with Jing. In that case, I was overthinking things. Fang Ruoxi didn't continue the topic as she looked at Zhou and asked, "What's your answer? Since you're willing to team up with me, I naturally don't mind cozying up to you," Zhou said with a shrug. "Then it's a deal. I've already found the other 2 team members. From today onwards, the 4 of us will train together during the afternoon cultivation class to ensure that we have sufficient cooperation and tacit understanding during the combat test." Fang Ruoxi looked at the watch on her wrist and turned to Zhou. "Come on. It's almost time for the afternoon cultivation class." When Li Ji and Tian Xiangdong saw Fang Ruoxi return with Zhou, they were slightly taken aback. They knew that Fang Ruoxi was looking for a 4th teammate, but they didn't know who she was looking for. Now that they saw that the person Fang Ruoxi had found was Zhou, they were somewhat puzzled. After all, they had seen what Zhou had done over the past month. Cultivation was like rowing a boat against the current. If one didn't advance, they would fall behind, especially in actual combat. It was difficult to grasp the fleeting opportunities in actual combat despite frequent practice. If one didn't train for a few days, their reaction speed would be much slower. Zhou hadn't trained for more than a month, and only knew how to game all day. It made him look pale and sickly, so his actual combat level would definitely plummet. Just like professional fighters, if they didn't train for a period of time, they needed sufficient time to recover before they could compete. No one could become stronger by lying down. They would only become weaker by lying down. There were only a few days left before the college entrance examination. Even if Zhou turned over a new leaf, it would probably be difficult for him to return to his original combat level. "Ruoxi, don't tell me the 4th teammate you mentioned is Zhou? This joke is a little too much." Tian Xiangdong rubbed his nose and said in an exaggerated manner, "I'm not joking. Zhou is our 4th teammate," Fang Ruoxi said in all seriousness. Chapter 5. Tian Xiangdong's words were clearly meant for Zhou to hear, but Zhou wasn't angry. The combat test of the college entrance exam was something that concerned the rest of their lives for the rest of their lives. No matter who it was, they would want to do their best and not let others affect their result. Whether they could enter a famous school or find a decent job after graduation, or even have a chance of entering high society, had a lot to do with it. Furthermore, the strength of their teammates could affect their own safety. No one would joke about such matters. Even Zhou had wanted to enter a famous school before he obtained the mysterious phone. Only then would he have more opportunities to become stronger and not be lost to the masses. Therefore, Zhou could understand why Tian Xiangdong had said that. After Tian Xiangdong said that, he didn't look at Fang Ruoxi and looked straight at Zhou. Fang Ruoxi also looked at Zhou and said, "Although Jing Yi is very outstanding, I still think Zhou is the best candidate." On the other side, Li Ji thought for a moment and said, "We naturally trust Ruoxi's judgment. Zhou is indeed outstanding, but the results of the combat test are very important to all of us. We have to treat it seriously. Let's do it this way. If Zhou doesn't mind, let's do a small test. When the test results are out, it will be obvious if Zhou is suitable for our team." Li Ji is right. "I agree," Tian Xiangdong said first. "How will the test be conducted?" Fang Ruoxi asked. "That's easy. I'm the weakest among the 3 of us. Let Zhou fight me. As long as he defeats me, he will naturally have the right to join our team. This won't be considered bullying, right?" Tian Xiangdong immediately said. Fang Ruoxi didn't say a word as she looked at Zhou. Zhou knew that he had to express himself, Otherwise, it would be very difficult for him to integrate into the team. Although he wasn't interested in integrating into the team, he wanted to obtain better results for the combat test. Fang Ruashi's team was probably the strongest team in Guide High School. Joining them wasn't a bad thing. I'm fine with it, but actual combat is risky. It wouldn't be good to injure anyone, Zhou said with a nod. Tian Xiangdong laughed when he heard that. Zhou, I know you have been cultivating ascetic meditation all this while. Your constitution and strength must be extraordinary, but your speed is definitely lacking. I won't bully you. How about we decide the victor with strength? Fang Ruashi couldn't help but frown when she heard Tian Xiangdong's words. The lightning skill that Tian Xiangdong cultivated was also a primordial energy art that focused on explosive strength. Furthermore, Tian Xiangdong also knew a primordial energy skill, Lightning Fist, that matched the lightning skill. Although Tian Xiangdong's Lightning Fist was only rank 1, the typical high school student didn't have many opportunities to come into contact with primordial energy skills. To be able to grasp a primordial energy skill, one that matched one's primordial energy art, was quite rare. Fang Ruashi didn't know Zhou family background, but from how he cultivated a primordial energy art like ascetic meditation and had never bought primordial energy crystals to aid his cultivation, it was likely that his family was in dire straits. If he didn't even buy primordial energy crystals, why would he spend so much money on primordial energy skill crystals? Furthermore, Zhou didn't use any primordial energy skills when he fought in Jing. Fang Ruashi's lips moved, but she didn't say a word. She thought to herself, it's good to see how Zhou responds. How do we compete in strength? Zhou asked Tian Xiangdong. Although the school has a strength measuring device, those numbers are meaningless. Let's fight fists. Whoever retreats loses. How about that? Tian Xiangdong said with narrowed eyes. Let's use the school's strength measuring device, Zhou said after some thought. Why? Are you afraid I'll hurt you? Tian Xiangdong said with a twitch of his lips. Zhou smiled without a word. He was afraid that he would kill Tian Xiangdong with one punch. It wasn't a secret in school that Tian Xiangdong cultivated the primordial energy skill, Lightning Fist. It was probably impossible to defeat him with pure strength. If he were to use Vigor Divine Fist, Zhou was afraid that he would blow up Tian Xiangdong's arm and body. Alright, since you are afraid, let's use the strength measuring device, Tian Xiangdong said regretfully. During his 3 years in high school, all the teachers and students said that Zhou was the #1 genius of Guide High School. Tian Xiangdong was naturally unconvinced and had long wanted to defeat Zhou to prove himself. This was a tiny desire that many top students of Guide High School had. After Zhou was defeated by Jing in one strike, this desire faded greatly. However, since there was a chance to defeat Zhou, Tian Xiangdong still felt a little anticipation and excitement. After all, Zhou was once hailed as the #1 genius of Guide High School. The only thing that left Tian Xiangdong regretful was that he couldn't defeat Zhou with his own hands like in Jing. All he could do was use the strength measuring device's numbers to defeat him. It was still lunch break, so there weren't many students in the equipment room. As usual, Yu Qiubai personally tested each device to see if there were any problems so that he could request for repairs. Just as Yu Qiubai sat in the space-like primordial energy testing device, he heard the door to the equipment room open before someone walked in. Who would come here during lunch break? Yu Qiubai looked out through the primordial energy testing device's observation hole and realized that it was Fang Ruashi, Tian Xiangdong, Li Ji, and Zhou. He couldn't help but be surprised. These 4 students could be considered the top elites of Guide High School. Apart from Zhou, who had given up on himself, the other 3 were graduates with the highest chances of doing well this year. The 4 of them had come to the equipment room together, including Zhou. This left Yu Qiubai somewhat curious, unsure what they were doing here. For Could it be that the four of them are forming a team to participate in the combat test? But with Zhou Wen's present situation, why would Fang Ruoxi and company team up with him? Yu Qiubai's heart stirred as he sat in the primordial energy testing device without coming out. He wanted to see what they were doing. Do you want to go first or should I? Tian Xiangdong walked in front of the strength measuring device and turned to look at Zhou Wen. Anything, Zhou Wen said indifferently. Everyone has 3 chances anyway. The highest one is the most important. It doesn't matter who goes first. I'll go first, Tian Xiangdong said as he walked in front of the testing device. Tian Xiangdong took a deep breath and circulated his lightning technique. He gathered his strength and punched the pressure plate of the primordial energy testing device. The pressure plate was made of alloy, and there was a hydraulic system behind it. Depending on the amount of strength it received, the screen would display a score when the pressure plate retreated. When Tian Xiangdong punched, the numbers on the screen lit up one after another until the number 7 lit up. Only then did there be no movement. Tian Xiangdong didn't use lightning fist this time and only relied on his strength. He was rather satisfied with the value of 7. Chapter 6. Tian Xiangdong's 7 strength surprised Zhou Wen slightly. The strength value of the strength measuring device was slightly different from the one in the game, but it wasn't too different. It could basically be treated as the same unit of measurement. Before Zhou Wen obtained the mysterious phone, he only had 7 strength. It's your turn, Tian Xiangdong said to Zhou Wen as he retreated to the side. Zhou Wen walked to the strength measuring device as Tian Xiangdong and company's gazes landed on him. They wanted to know how much strength this former number 1 genius of Guide High School had left. Inside the primordial energy cabin, Yu Qiubai also wanted to know how much strength Zhou Wen had left after more than a month of being dispirited. Although strength wouldn't degrade as quickly as one's reaction speed in actual combat, possessing strength was one thing, and exerting force was another. Exerting force required a long period of practice to perfectly release one's strength. Over time, one's technique would become rusty, and even if one still had strength, it would be difficult to fully release it. Zhou Wen stood in front of the pressure board and assumed the stance of inch punch. Inch punch wasn't a primordial energy skill, but an ordinary combat technique. It was part of the school's regular teaching material. However, inch punch was easy to learn but difficult to master. It allowed one to produce the greatest amount of strength in the shortest distance. It required a lot of hard practice before one could achieve anything. Furthermore, inch punch's distance was short, so it didn't look beautiful or cool. The typical student was more willing to practice fist techniques that looked domineering and effective. Of course, more students would choose to practice their weapon technique. After all, in actual combat, the lethality of weapons was far greater than their fists and legs. Seeing Zhou Wen's fist nearly stick to the pressure board, Fang Ruoxi and company realized that Zhou Wen was about to use inch punch. Tian Xiangdong curled his lips and said, "Inch punch's explosive strength is indeed very strong, but it's not easy to master. It's difficult to master it without years of hard practice. I hope Zhou Wen won't overreach himself." Although Tian Xiangdong's words weren't pleasant, Yu Qiubai agreed with him. Inch punch wasn't easy to master, and Zhou Wen didn't seem to have practiced it much in the past. In the past month or so, he had been engrossed in gaming. If he were to use inch punch for the strength test, it might even worsen his result. Dang! As the 4 of them were in thought, they saw Zhou Wen's fist tremble extremely quickly. The speed of the punch was just too fast. If it wasn't for the explosive sound coming from the pressure board, they would have thought that they were seeing things. It was as though Zhou Wen's fist hadn't moved at all. The 4's 8 eyes quickly looked at the screen. They wanted to know how much strength Zhou Wen's punch could produce. The distance is too short. Tian Xiangdong, Fang Ruoxi, and Li Ji simultaneously had the same thought. The distance he punched just now was too short. Although it's said that 1-inch punch uses the shortest distance to unleash the strongest force, it's very difficult to exert force if the distance is too short. It's just like how an average person has to squat down to jump higher and retract their arm to strike out with more force. 1-inch punch works in the opposite direction. Only a true 1-inch punch expert can unleash his full strength at such a short distance. Yuchiobai thought more about it, but when they saw the numbers on the screen, their eyes widened. The numbers lit up one after another, and in a blink of an eye, they reached 10. Zhou Wen's inch punch had actually produced 10 strength. 10. It's actually 10. How is that possible? Yuchiobai was pleasantly surprised. Yuchiobai had been teaching for many years, so he knew very well how terrifying it was for a high school student to produce 10 strength without using a primordial energy skill. Even if the typical student had a strength crystal, it would be very difficult for their strength to reach such a height in high school. This was because the typical strength crystal had a limited augmentation to one's strength. After one's strength exceeded 7, using the typical strength crystal was almost useless. Unless one had an extremely high-quality strength crystal, one's strength could only improve further. Otherwise, one could only practice primordial energy arts to constantly temper their bodies and slowly increase their strength. However, that was just too difficult. Typical humans would find it difficult to reach 10 strength before evolving to the legendary stage. Most humans would only have 7 or 8 strength before advancing to the legendary stage. Zhou Wen was clearly only at the mortal stage, but he could produce 10 strength purely with his body. This was considered rare in the entire alliance. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that it was 1 in a million. Could it be that Zhou Wen hasn't given up on himself? The reason he's been sleeping in class is because he's been training too hard? The more Yuchiobai thought about it, the more he felt that he was right. The way he looked at Zhou Wen was mixed with approval and love, as well as a sense of gratification. That must be the case. The former principal really has a good eye. I misunderstood him. 10 strength at the mortal stage. Probably no one in Guide City can match him. Even among the high school students in the Earth Federation, he's one of the best. What a good kid. It's really been hard on him. The more Yuchiobai thought about it, the more he found Zhou Wen pleasing to the eye. He felt that not only was Zhou Wen talented, but he also had an excellent character. Ever since he was defeated by Jing, he had been the target of criticism. Despite the immense pressure, Zhou Wen didn't try to defend himself. He had managed to cultivate to such a stage in such a short period of time. Such a temperament and talent were rare among high school students. It's fake, right? 10 strength without using a primordial energy skill? Don't tell me this fellow hides at home every day to crazily hone his strength? Tian Xiangdong couldn't help but gulp a mouthful of saliva. 10 strength at the mortal stage was just too terrifying. There weren't many such figures in a small city like Guide City. Li Ji and Fang Ruoshi looked at Zhou Wen with odd expressions. Although Fang Ruoshi always believed that Zhou Wen wasn't a person who would give up on himself and that he was definitely training hard in private, she never expected him to cultivate his strength to such a level. From the looks of it, the strength measuring device's data is somewhat different from in-game. In-game, my strength is 9, but in reality it's 10, Zhou Wen thought to himself. To be able to produce a strength of 10, you live up to your reputation as the #1 genius of Guide High School. However, if you think you can beat me with this, you're wrong, Tian Xiangdong said to Zhou Wen. Upon seeing Zhou Wen's results, Tian Xiangdong was already willing to let him join their team. Although Tian Xiangdong could produce more than 10 strength with Lightning Fist, it expended primordial energy. With his present primordial energy, he could only deliver 1 punch in a short period of time, making it impossible for him to engage in prolonged combat. As for Zhou Wen, he had a solid 10 strength, allowing him to engage in prolonged combat. This was of great help to the team, even more so than his Lightning Fist. There was also Zhou Wen's inch punch. To be able to use such an inch punch, Zhou Wen clearly hadn't truly fallen into depravity. He had definitely been cultivating in secret, so there was no problem of him being rusty. Chapter 7. Xiangdong. Li Ji wanted to say something, but Tian Xiangdong waved his hand and cut him off. It was obvious how much help a fellow with strength 10 could provide to their team. Li Ji felt that since Zhou Wen had already displayed sufficient strength, there was no need to continue. It was not beneficial for anyone to lose decorum. Tian Xiangdong's forceful use of lightning fist to defeat Zhou Wen would be a loss for them if Zhou Wen were to really leave. Seeing Tian Xiangdong walk to the pressure board, Li Ji wanted to say something but was stopped by Feng Ruoxi. "Is this really fine?" Li Ji asked Feng Ruoxi. "It's fine. That fellow has already accepted Zhou Wen. He just doesn't want to lose," Feng Ruoxi said indifferently. "Xiangdong, that fellow really wants to save face." Li Ji was slightly taken aback before he came to a realization. He cursed jokingly and didn't say another word. He watched Tian Xiangdong carry out the second strength test. Tian Xiangdong wore a heavy expression as he stood in front of the pressure board. He slowly raised his fist, his veins protruding like lightning bolts crisscrossing each other. It made his fist look ferocious and terrifying. Bam! His fist violently smashed into the pressure plate. The pressure plate, which was made of a special alloy, was visibly pushed back. The number on the screen quickly lit up and finally stopped at the number 11. "How is it?" Tian Xiangdong secretly wiped his cold sweat when he sensed that his primordial energy was almost drained. His own strength was 7, and rank 1 lightning fist could only raise his strength by half. It wasn't very stable. At times he could deliver a 10, and at other times he could deliver an 11. Today's punch was pretty good. Thankfully, he had defeated Zhou Wen. Not bad. Zhou Wen was indeed a genius when it came to cultivation, but his emotional quotient was very average. He didn't notice the change in Tian Xiangdong's emotions. All he thought about was how he couldn't join the team if he couldn't win. Therefore, he walked towards the strength measuring machine again. However, this time, Zhou Wen didn't immediately punch. Instead, he carefully sized up the strength measuring machine. "What are you looking at? If you can't do it, just say it. It's not embarrassing to lose to me." When Tian Xiangdong saw Zhou Wen's hesitation, he imagined that he wasn't confident enough to deliver a stronger punch. Zhou Wen looked at the strength measuring device and said worriedly, "If this thing is damaged, the school won't make me pay, right?" Tian Xiangdong laughed in exasperation when he heard Zhou Wen's words. "Bro, aren't you being rather pretentious? This was a strength tester, specifically used to test one's strength. Although it was a low-grade version used in high schools, with an upper limit of 20 points, not many high school students could hit the maximum points, let alone break it. Let me put it this way, if you really break it, I'll pay for it." "That's true." Zhou Wen nodded and looked at the pressure measuring device. It did seem rather sturdy, so it shouldn't be that easily damaged. Without any hesitation, Zhou Wen raised a fist. The skin on his fist gradually turned red with a metallic luster, as though it was plated with a red metallic film. Primordial energy skill. So Zhou Wen has also cultivated an primordial energy skill. Tian Xiangdong immediately felt disappointed. Without a doubt, with Zhou Wen's strength, as long as he cultivated an primordial energy skill, the strength he produced would definitely be stronger than Tian Xiangdong's, no matter how weak it was. Tian Xiangdong knew that he was bound to lose. Feng Ruoxi and Li Ji were pleasantly surprised as well. With Zhou Wen's primordial energy skill, they were even more confident of obtaining high scores in the combat test. Bam! Zhou Wen slammed his fist into the pressure plate, causing it to bounce back as though it had been struck by a hammer. The numbers on the screen constantly lit up, instantly exceeding 11. I wonder how many numbers his primordial energy skill will produce in the end. As Feng Ruoxi thought about it, she saw the numbers light up too quickly. In the blink of an eye, all the numbers lit up. Her expression couldn't help but change slightly. Before anyone could think further, a strange sound came from the strength measuring device. The back of the device had cracked open at some point, spewing out a pale yellow liquid like a fountain. Tian Xiangdong and company widened their mouths as they stared blankly at Zhou Wen and the strength measuring device that was spewing water. They remained silent for a long time. Yu Qiubai's eyes widened as well. He wished he could rush forward to personally confirm if the strength measuring device was really faulty. He naturally didn't want Zhou Wen to lose money, but he found it unbelievable that a high school student's primordial energy skill could be this powerful. Tian Xiangdong shuddered. Thinking of the strength of the punch, the consequences would be unimaginable if he were to test his strength with Zhou Wen's fist. The upper limit of the strength measuring device was 20, but it didn't mean that it could only withstand 20 strength. In fact, to destroy the hydraulic compartment at the back required more than 20 strength. Even if Zhou Wen had 10 strength, he probably needed a rank 8 or 9 primordial energy skill to achieve such a feat if he hadn't learned of Zhou Wen's background from the former principal. He really suspected that Zhou Wen had used a high-level primordial energy skill crystal. Otherwise, it was impossible for him to possess such strength. However, with Zhou Wen's background, it didn't seem possible for him to possess such a high-level primordial energy skill crystal. If he really relied on himself to cultivate his primordial energy skill to such a level, that would be terrifying. Yu Qiubai couldn't help but recall the former principal's evaluation of Zhou Wen. There were two kinds of geniuses in this world. One was a genius named Zhou Wen, and the other was other geniuses. You said that you would pay if it's damaged. A man has to keep his word, right? Zhou Wen was taken aback as he looked at Tian Xiangdong in exasperation. He never expected Vigor Divine Fist to be so powerful that it would actually damage the strength measuring device. He was a poor wretch, so if the school really pursued the matter, he really didn't have the money to pay. I'll pay. Bro, a problem that can be solved with money isn't a problem. We're all old classmates and we're on the same team. Leave it to me, Tian Xiangdong said with a beaming smile as he snapped to his senses. Tian Xiangdong's family was considered wealthy in Guide City, so he wasn't short of that bit of money. However, he couldn't find a teammate like Zhou Wen in a small city like Guide City. With Zhou Wen joining them, Tian Xiangdong felt that they might not only be able to get first in Guide City's combat test, but they might even be able to set their goals higher. Li Ji and Fang Ruoxi were in a good mood as well. With a powerful teammate like Zhou Wen joining them, they were one step closer to their goals. This fellow seems to be more interesting than I imagined. Fang Ruoxi looked at Zhou Wen and narrowed her eyes slightly. With Zhou Wen officially joining the team, the quartet submitted their application for the combat test to the school. The school's leaders and many teachers were somewhat surprised to see Zhou Wen on the list of the four-member team. Fang Ruoxi, Li Ji, and Tian Xiangdong's teachers even sought them out for a private chat, clearly hinting that they would choose other teammates so that Zhou Wen wouldn't be a burden to them. However, Fang Ruoxi and company refused to budge. They insisted on teaming up with Zhou Wen, leaving their teachers extremely vexed. Only Yu Qiubai drank his tea in a carefree manner. He knew very well that Zhou Wen was the strongest among the four. Just watch. After the college entrance examination, you will know who's the burden, Yu Qiubai thought as he drank his tea. Chapter 8. However, Zhou Wen didn't think too much about it. What others thought had nothing to do with him. All he wanted was to get good results in the combat test at the college entrance examination and enter a famous school. Then, he could game well until he graduated and find a job that allowed him to come into contact with dimensional zones. However, there was something that bothered Zhou Wen. He had never thought about how Jing had defeated him. With Fang Ruoxi's reminder, he felt that something was amiss. Jing was about the same age as him, perhaps even younger. However, it was very likely that she was already a legendary expert. Although there was only a difference of one level, the difference between a mortal and a legendary was like night and day. It was nearly impossible for someone at the mortal stage to defeat a legendary expert. The most obvious sign was that only legendary experts had a chance of obtaining companion beasts. And it was very difficult to obtain companion beasts at the mortal stage. Even if one obtained a companion egg, they didn't have enough primordial energy to incubate it. There were also many invisible differences. For example, after humans advanced to the legendary stage, they would awaken a legendary life providence that augmented their physique greatly, further widening the gap between the mortal stage and the legendary stage. Unless there was a reason that forced them to take action, the typical legendary expert wouldn't even bother to attack someone at the mortal stage. However, Jing had taken the initiative to challenge a mortal stage student like him. Furthermore, she had transferred schools not long after the challenge. No matter how he looked at it, it was as though she had specially come to beat him up. I've never left Guide City my entire life. How could I have offended such a figure? Could it be Dad? No matter how Zhou thought about it, there seemed to be only one possibility. Zhou's mother had passed away during childbirth. He had grown up in a single-parent family, and his father was extremely unreliable. Zhou's father's name was Zhou Lingfeng. Just like his name, he was a man who resembled the wind. From the age of 5, Zhou learned to be alone. He even knew how to cook simple meals, do the laundry, do the housework, and go to the supermarket to buy things. And his unreliable father claimed that this was to nurture his survival skills as a man from a young age. This was also the capital he needed to get a wife in the future. Although his unreliable father was extremely lazy, the only thing that comforted Zhou was that Zhou Lingfeng never skimped on his living expenses. Zhou Lingfeng worked as a translator and was proficient in many languages. When he was young, he would often translate documents at home. But as time progressed, the translation software became more and more powerful, and Zhou Lingfeng's work gradually decreased. Later on, when Zhou grew older and became more independent, Zhou Lingfeng took on some on-site translation jobs. He would often head out, sometimes for about a week, and sometimes for 2 to 3 months. It was even more ridiculous this time. Zhou hadn't seen him for half a year. If he hadn't transferred his living expenses to Zhou's account on time every month, Zhou would have been worried that he had died outside. This was because Zhou Lingfeng would sometimes go to relatively remote areas where communication was terrible. It was common for him to lose contact with his phone, so Zhou was already used to it. Even if he was not used to it, there was nothing he could do. Aside from waiting for Zhou Lingfeng to return, there was nothing he could do. With only the two of them in the family, Zhou didn't have the chance to offend someone like Jing. Therefore, Zhou suspected that his father, Zhou Lingfeng, had offended someone, and since they couldn't find Zhou Lingfeng, they decided to vent their anger on him. Zhou had no confidence in his father's character at all. He was a glutton who loved to have fun. He often frequented places like bars. In the past, he had seduced many chicks and ended up being chased and beaten up by their men. If not for Zhou's strong survival skills, he suspected that Zhou Lingfeng wouldn't have been able to raise him alive. Just as he was thinking, he suddenly heard his phone ring. It gave the spaced-out Zhou a fright. He took out his ordinary phone and saw that it was his father, Zhou Lingfeng. "I really get what I want." Zhou hurriedly picked up the call. Just as he was about to say something, he heard Zhou Lingfeng's voice. "Son, I'm getting married. Are you coming to my wedding?" Thankfully, Zhou hadn't drunk any water, or he would have spat it out. "You're getting married? Who are you getting married to?" Zhou didn't mind Zhou Lingfeng getting married again. After all, Zhou Lingfeng had been single for so many years. It was normal for him to find a partner. Furthermore, after getting married, he might not be as unreliable as he was now. It might even be a good thing. "I'll send you a photo of little sweetheart," Zhou Lingfeng said. Without waiting for Zhou to say a word, Zhou Lingfeng hung up the phone and sent a photo over. Zhouwen glanced at the photo on the phone and saw that it was a photo of Zhou Lingfeng and a woman. The woman looked to be in her 30s at most. She was elegant and beautiful with a rather good bearing. She was different from the so-called beauties on the internet. This woman had an intellectual beauty and an indescribable unique bearing. "How is it? The new mom I found for you isn't bad, right?" "Her name is Ouyanglan," Zhou Lingfeng said smugly as he called again. "Not bad, but she's not my mom," Zhouwen said. Although he didn't mind Zhou Lingfeng getting married again, he was already an adult. He had no plans of acknowledging another mom. After all, Zhou Lingfeng wasn't usually at home. He was already used to living alone, and the woman might not welcome a burden like him. It was good for them to live their own lives. "My wife is obviously your mom. It's an undeniable fact. By the way, son, it's my wedding in a few days. You have to attend it, all right?" Zhou Lingfeng said indifferently, as though he didn't care about anything. "Where is it? When?" Zhouwen asked. "Luoyang. About a week from now," Zhou Lingfeng said. "It's the college entrance exam in a few days. The time you mentioned happens to be during the combat test. I plan on participating in the combat test, but there's a time conflict. I can't go even if I want to," Zhouwen said helplessly. He was willing to attend the wedding, but he really couldn't go this time. Time really passes quickly. You're about to take the college entrance exam. Zhou Lingfeng clearly didn't remember the matter as he sighed when he heard that. Zhouwen didn't have any expectations for Zhou Lingfeng, but he still felt a little disappointed when he heard that. Perhaps Zhou Lingfeng had even forgotten that he was graduating from high school this year. "Dad, do you know that there's a metal biscuit box in our cloakroom?" Zhouwen suddenly asked. "Biscuit box? What biscuit box?" Zhou Lingfeng asked in puzzlement. "It's a biscuit box made of metal that's about 30 centimeters long. On it is a cartoon bear." Zhouwen carefully described the biscuit box's characteristic. "That's a bear biscuit box. I often ate it when I was young, but that brand of biscuit is no longer sold on the market. Our biscuit box might have been left behind in the past." "Why are you asking?" Zhou Lingfeng asked. Chapter 9. Cell Phone. Zhou Lingfeng was somewhat puzzled. After a while, he suddenly said, "Is the cell phone you're referring to a completely white metal shell with a black screen and no buttons? It's about 5 to 6 inches long?" "That's right. That's it. Is that cell phone yours?" Zhouwen asked in surprise. "No, it's your grandfather's. If you hadn't mentioned it, I would have forgotten about it." Zhou Lingfeng said with a smile, "That cell phone is your grandfather's treasure." "Grandfather's treasure? Where did grandfather get it from?" Zhouwen pressed when he heard something amiss in Zhou Lingfeng's tone. Zhou Lingfeng recounted the origins of the cell phone, leaving Zhouwen stunned. Zhouwen's grandfather was a carpenter back then, but he wasn't a typical carpenter who made tables and chairs. He knew how to do those things, but his main job was to build wooden buildings that mimicked ancient times. In the past, when Guide Ancient City was being rebuilt, many wooden buildings that mimicked ancient times had to be built in order to restore it to its original state. Zhouwen's grandfather took the job and worked in Guide Ancient City for more than a year. During this period of time, a dried-up ancient well was dug out at the ancient city's construction site. Back then, there were no outsiders in the middle of the night. Only Zhouwen's grandfather and a few other workers were there. When the ancient well was dug out, there was actually a faint glow of treasure radiating from below. The workers thought that they had dug up some kind of treasure. In the end, they came up with a plan and went down to dig for treasure, wanting to make a fortune. After entering the ancient well, they discovered an ancient, rotting wooden box. The wooden box was almost completely rotten, and there were many cracks on it. The glow came from the crack. The workers brought the box up, imagining that there was some treasure inside. If they could split it, they might be able to live a good life for the rest of their lives. To their surprise, when they opened the wooden box, it was a cell phone. Although cell phones had just become common back then, they weren't rare. Furthermore, the cell phone was still lit up in the beginning, but when they took it out, the screen was black as though it had run out of battery. There were no buttons on the cell phone, nor was there a charging port. Zhouwen's grandfather and company were greatly disappointed. They imagined that the phone had been placed there as a prank. Since it looked broken and worthless, they lost interest. Finally, Zhouwen's grandfather threw it into his tool bag. Later, the phone was brought back to the Zhou family. Zhouwen's grandfather didn't throw it away but kept it in the storeroom. When Zhou Lingfeng was young, his grandfather had even told him this story. However, it was told as a ghost story back then, so Zhou Lingfeng remembered it rather clearly. That stupid phone can't be turned on at all. When I was young, I took it to a phone repair shop to ask for the price. I wanted to exchange it for a few packs of cigarettes, but the phone repair shop said it wasn't worth much, so I just threw it into a box of cookies. Don't tell me you want to exchange it for money? This cell phone is too new and can't be considered an antique. Old models are worthless, said Zhou Lingfeng. Zhouwen thought to himself, thankfully, you didn't switch the phone to cigarettes. Otherwise, it would be too late for me to cry. Has this phone never lit up before? Zhouwen asked again. How can it light up? It's been there for who knows how many years. Ignoring the fact that it's broken, even if it wasn't, it would have long been out of battery. Zhou Lingfeng interrupted Zhouwen. All right, I still have a lot of work to do. Anyway, I've already informed you. It's up to you if you want to come to the wedding. With that said, Zhou Lingfeng hung up. Was it dug out from the ancient well in Guide Ancient City? Unfortunately, Guide Ancient City has already become a dimensional zone. Ordinary people have no way of approaching it. However, Guide City's combat test is held in Guide Ancient City. I wonder where the ancient well is and if I have a chance to take a look. Zhouwen thought to himself, but he couldn't figure it out. Just as Zhou Lingfeng had said, a cell phone was a product of recent decades. It was impossible for it to be an antique. Furthermore, even if it was an antique, it was impossible for it to have such magical powers. Oh no, I forgot to ask Dad if he had offended someone outside. Zhouwen originally wanted to call again, but he didn't after some thought. After all, Anjing had already left and hadn't really done anything to him. Since the matter was already in the past, there was no need to mention it again. Taking out the mysterious phone, he opened the ant nest program and once again entered the sea of monsters. Ants were killed by the blood-colored avatar as though the in-game character was him. The experience and insights gained from combat were felt by Zhouwen himself. Now, Zhouwen had more and more experience in killing vigor ant. He could last longer than before, killing 400 to 500 vigor ants with one life. In the past, he could only kill about 100. Unfortunately, his luck today was mediocre. Only 2 strength results and a constitution crystal drop. Furthermore, their levels weren't high, so they could only be used as energy replenishment. There was no way for him to raise his level directly. Just as he was having a good time, he suddenly saw a red mutated vigor ant appear. Immediately, he was delighted as he controlled the blood-colored avatar to charge forward. Previously, he hadn't learned Vigor Divine Fist, so killing mutated vigor ants was a little difficult. This time, Zhouwen used Vigor Divine Fist to smash the mutated vigor ant's head to smithereens. Following that, he punched it again, blasting its body apart. Ding! With a crisp sound, another dimensional crystal dropped. Unfortunately, there was only one this time. Killed mutated vigor ant discovered constitution crystal. Zhouwen took a careful look and saw the number 9 on the constitution crystal. He couldn't help but be delighted. His physique was currently at 8 points. With this physique crystal, he would be able to improve further. Constitution was related to one's body's strength and durability. Only with a strong constitution could one not tire out in prolonged battles. His body's resistance would also increase. For example, the ascetic meditation he cultivated mainly strengthened his constitution and strength. He controlled the blood-colored avatar to pick up the constitution crystal. Immediately, a strange force emanated from the phone and instantly spread throughout Zhou Wen's body. It made all his cells seem to come alive. Seeing his constitution turn to 9 in-game, Zhou Wen felt his body become a lot tougher. When the ordinary vigor ants bit the blood-colored avatar, the blood-colored avatar lost significantly less blood. Zhou Wen continued grinding and realized that mutated vigor ants would occasionally appear deep in the nest. They didn't have a fixed location, and it wasn't always possible for dimensional crystals to drop. Later, Zhou Wen encountered 2 more mutated vigor ants, but nothing dropped. Time passed quickly as he grinded. Zhou Wen didn't change much from before. He slept in class and gamed after class. Only during cultivation class would he practice his teamwork and chemistry with Fang Ruoxi and company. Chapter 10. Tian Xiangdong was practicing his boxing techniques on the field, but his eyes would occasionally glance at Zhou Wen, who was under the shade of a tree beside the field. He had been practicing for nearly an hour, but Zhou Wen had been sitting under the tree and playing on his phone for an hour. Comparisons are really infuriating. We are training so hard, but that fellow is just casually gaming. Tian Xiangdong felt more depressed the more he watched. After the past few days of training together, Tian Xiangdong understood one thing. The reason why Zhou Wen was the #1 genius of Guide High School wasn't only because of his cultivation talent. Tian Xiangdong originally believed that the saying, "cultivation is like rowing a boat against the current," applied to all humans. After all, humans weren't machines. If they didn't train daily, it was easy for them to regress. Especially when it came to actual combat, there would be a certain deviation in the grasp of timing and the sense of distance. But Zhou Wen was different. As long as he learned something, regardless of whether he practiced or not, he would be able to use it skillfully and naturally. Over the past few days, Zhou Wen would cooperate when the quartet practiced together. But when it was time for them to practice alone, Zhou Wen would run to the side to game. If it wasn't because Zhou Wen's performance was impeccable when the quartet worked together, to the point that he could even be said to be the most outstanding among them, Tian Xiangdong couldn't help but take the place of a teacher to teach him a lesson. He wanted him to know the importance of studying hard and improving daily. But now, all Tian Xiangdong could do was secretly watch as Zhou Wen gamed while he trained bitterly. "What are you looking at? If you don't focus, your movements will change," Li Ji said as he walked over. Tian Xiangdong glanced at Zhou Wen, who was gaming, and said enviously, "How good would it be if I had Zhou Wen's talent? Cultivation is so painful. Who wouldn't want to game every day?" Li Ji said with a smile, "Do you really think Zhou Wen only games every day? Isn't that so? We can all see how much fun he has every day," Tian Xiangdong said. However, Li Ji shook his head and said, "We can only see him when he's in school. We can't see what he does after school." "You mean to say that he's been cultivating hard at home after school?" Tian Xiangdong understood what Li Ji meant. There's no such thing as reaping without sowing. Zhou Wen might look harmless, as though he doesn't care about anything, but he's extremely proud deep down. He suffered such a terrible defeat to Enjing the last time. Although it wasn't a result of the battle, with his personality, he probably won't be able to let it go. He must be working hard at his cultivation. This can be seen from his combat proficiency. He's definitely not as decadent and playful as he appears, Li Ji said seriously. Then why does he have to be so decadent in school? There's no need at all. Isn't it better to use the time spent playing games to cultivate? Tian Xiangdong was skeptical. Li Ji glanced at Zhou Wen and said, "I think that when he was defeated by Enjing, he might have had some psychological impact, making others mistakenly believe that he had given up on himself. But that doesn't explain why he's gaming in school?" Tian Xiangdong was still puzzled. "Think about it. If everyone thinks that you're a scumbag, But you amaze everyone in the college entrance examination and get first place in the city, then look at everyone else's faces. Don't you think that would be a great feeling? Li Ji said. Holy sh*t, that fellow Zhou Wen sure has a dark mind. That scumbag. Tian Xiangdong immediately came to a realization as he nearly shouted. Thankfully, Li Ji covered his mouth. Zhou Wen obviously wasn't as Tian Xiangdong imagined. He could also raise his strength by gaming. Furthermore, his in-game character was equivalent to his avatar. When his in-game character fought, he would definitely gain combat experience and skill proficiency. Therefore, he didn't need to practice. Mutated Vigor Ant. Zhou Wen was happily grinding when he suddenly saw a blood-red Vigor Ant appear. Over the past few days, he had killed at least a dozen mutated Vigor Ants, but the outcome wasn't satisfactory. Apart from the first mutated Vigor Ant that dropped two-dimensional crystals, the subsequent Vigor Ants had a lower chance of dropping dimensional crystals. Furthermore, their quality was much worse. Ignoring primordial energy skill crystals, even level 9-dimensional crystals were rare. There were even about 10 mutated Vigor Ants that didn't drop anything. Zhou Wen wasn't as excited as before when he saw the mutated Vigor Ant again. He very calmly controlled the blood-colored avatar and went forward to deliver 2 Vigor Divine punches, killing the mutated Vigor Ant. Ding! A familiar sound rang in his ears. This time, something dropped. Zhou Wen wasn't very excited. Even if a dimensional crystal dropped, it wouldn't be of much use to him unless it was a speed crystal. It was only to replenish his energy. However, when Zhou Wen saw the item that dropped, he was slightly taken aback. This was because the item that dropped didn't have the word crystal. Killed mutated Vigor Ant discovered companion egg. A game notification popped up on the bottom left corner of the screen. Zhou Wen was pleasantly surprised when he saw the notification. Dropping a companion egg meant that there was a chance of having a companion beast. But according to what Zhou Wen knew, very few companion beasts appeared at the mortal stage. Basically, only those at the legendary stage could possess companion beasts. It could be said that companion beasts were a manifestation of strength and status. Humans who could walk the streets with companion beasts were basically experts at the legendary stage and above. They were revered and envied by others. The reason why there were almost no companion beasts at the mortal stage was that mortal stage dimensional creatures almost never dropped companion beasts. Only legendary stage dimensional creatures had a relatively low chance of dropping companion beasts. Furthermore, legendary stage companion eggs required primordial energy at the legendary stage to hatch. Therefore, even if a mortal stage human obtained a companion egg, there was no way for them to hatch it. After hatching, a companion beast could be said to share life and death with its owner. It was very difficult to transfer it to others. If one were to forcefully transfer it, one would have to pay a huge price. The typical person wouldn't do so. In a tiny place like Guide City, Zhou Wen had never seen a mortal stage human with a companion beast. The companion egg was the size of the blood-colored avatar's fist. It was milky white, translucent, and oval in shape. There were a few red points of light flashing inside, making it look mysterious and beautiful. Zhou Wen eagerly controlled the blood-colored avatar to pick up the companion egg. At the instant the blood-colored avatar's fingers touched the companion egg, Zhou Wen immediately felt his body tremble. The primordial energy in his body seemed to be sucked out by a syringe as it rapidly flowed towards the phone. Chapter 11. Zhou Wen felt like his body was about to collapse as though he was about to be sucked dry. The color in his face instantly drained as beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. In-game, after the companion egg absorbed the primordial energy, the red streams of light in the egg glowed brightly, dyeing the entire companion egg the color of a blood crystal. Kacha! The companion egg shattered as a blood-colored Vigor Ant phantasm flashed and entered the blood-colored avatar's body. At the same time, Zhou Wen felt a strange power surge into his body. It was as though the power had a life of its own. Although it couldn't be spoken, it was conveying information to Zhou in a strange manner. I pledge my life to follow you. I pledge my life to follow you. I pledge my life to follow you. As the faint voice resounded in Zhou mind, the power in his body gathered on the back of his left hand. Gradually, it formed a blood-colored ant pattern on the back of his left hand, as though it was a tattoo made of blood. Zhou subconsciously pulled up his sleeves and retracted his left hand, preventing others from seeing the ant pattern on the back of his hand. Companion beasts were very special existences. They were like parasites that parasitized humans and shared life and death with their owners. Zhou took a look at the information in-game. Indeed, there was an additional mutated vigor ant in the companion beast column. Then, he looked at the mutated vigor ant's information. Mutated vigor ant, mortal strength, 9 speed, 5 constitution, 9 primordial energy, 9 talent skill, vigor divine fist, rank 9, companion form, boxing glove. Zhou was delighted when he saw it. The mutated vigor ant's stats were comparable to top mortal stage humans. It also had a rank 9 vigor divine fist. If he summoned it, it would be equivalent to having a fighter with similar combat strength to Zhou. It might even be stronger than him. After all, Zhou's vigor divine fist was only at rank 7, while it was at rank 9. Now, Zhou wished he could immediately summon the mutated vigor ant to see what it looked like in real life. After all, he had only seen the cartoonish mutated vigor ant in-game. He had no idea what it looked like in real life. However, considering that he was still in school, Zhou could only hold back his desire. Summoning a mortal companion beast in a place like school would probably attract attention. Furthermore, Zhou had no way of explaining the origins of the mutated vigor ant. Tian Xiangdong couldn't help but secretly size up Zhou. When he saw Zhou's state, he said gloomily, "Look at that punk Zhou. He can make his face pale and break out into a cold sweat just by gaming. He looks extremely weak. If I hadn't seen his strength and primordial energy skill with my own eyes, I would really suspect that he's a sickly person." Unbeknownst to him, the reason why Zhou looked sickly was because he had been using his blood as a revival token in-game for more than a month. Although he didn't use a drop at a time, the amount of blood he expended was rather astonishing. This made Zhou look somewhat pale and thin, as though he had been malnourished for a long time or had anemia. This was one of the reasons why Yu Qiubai and the others found him dispirited in the past. His pale complexion made him look like he had given up on himself. After school, Zhou locked the doors and windows and drew the curtains tightly before summoning the mutated vigor ant in the living room. The mutated vigor ant tattoo on the back of his left hand emitted a resplendent sanguine glow. The blood on the tattoo seemed to come alive as it transformed into a blood-colored liquid that flowed across Zhou's palm. Soon, it enveloped his entire left hand, transforming into a boxing glove that was neither gold nor jade. On the back of the boxing glove was the vigor ant tattoo. Zhou looked at the boxing glove on his left hand and felt an explosive power fill his left fist. It was as though he could blow up a tank with a single punch. Indeed, it's the same as the livestream. The companion form of a companion beast has an augmentation effect. The vigor ant's augmentation effect should be strength, right? Unable to test the augmentation effects of the boxing glove at home, Zhou could only put it away and summon the mutated vigor ant instead. As the mutated vigor ant tattoo on the back of his hand lit up, a strange blood-colored projection appeared in front of Zhou. The projection gradually materialized into a blood-colored ant the size of a racehorse. In reality, the mutated vigor ant wasn't as cute as it looked in-game. Its blood-red carapace looked like it was forged from metal, and its curves seemed to contain infinite explosive power. Its slender ant legs were like serrated blades, and the antennae on its head were like extremely tough steel rods. Not to mention being pierced by its legs, just being struck by its body would probably result in broken bones and a crippled body. Looking at the mutated vigor ant up close gave a strong visual impact. It looked strangely dangerous and beautiful. While it left one shuddering in fear, it also gave one the urge to subdue it. The game's graphics sure aren't reliable. Such a brutal killing machine actually looks so cute in-game. Zhouwen got on the mutated vigor ant's back and made it circle the living room twice. Unfortunately, the living room was too small. The mutated vigor ant found it difficult to even turn around, so it didn't give much of a thrill. I'll try riding it when I have the chance in the future. If it wasn't necessary, Zhouwen had no intention of letting others know of the mutated vigor ant's existence. Although mortal stage companion beasts were rare, they were much weaker than legendary companion beasts. There was no point in flaunting them. However, after the companion egg dropped, Zhouwen worked even harder. He continued grinding on his phone, hoping to see what other good stuff he could get from the ant nest. With the college entrance exam approaching, Zhouwen went to school rather early. He wanted to head to class early to sleep, but just as he arrived at the school entrance, he saw Tian Xiangdong standing there with an odd expression. Upon seeing Zhouwen walk over, Tian Xiangdong quickly walked over with an odd expression. He gritted his teeth and said to Zhouwen, "Zhouwen, I'm sorry. My friend invited me to his team. I can't team up with you anymore." With that said, Tian Xiangdong turned and ran without waiting for Zhouwen to say a word. Zhouwen was slightly taken aback, unsure what was up with this fellow. It was almost time for the college entrance exam, but he was changing teams? I wonder if Feng Ruoxi has any backup plans for Tian Xiangdong to withdraw from the team. At this point in time, it's probably not easy to find another team member. As Zhouwen pondered, he walked into the school and saw Li Ji standing in front of him at some point in time. "Li Ji, do you know that Tian Xiangdong is withdrawing from the team?" Zhouwen asked. Li Ji was slightly taken aback as he looked at Zhouwen with an odd expression. "I'm sorry. Due to certain reasons, I can't participate in the combat test with you." Zhouwen looked at Li Ji as he had an ominous feeling. "Why?" Zhouwen asked Li Ji. "Don't ask. In short, I'm the one who let you down." Li Ji wore a look of shame as he bowed at Zhouwen before briskly leaving. When Zhouwen saw Feng Ruoxi, he could tell something from her expression. He was even more certain of his guess. Chapter 12. Why? Zhouwen asked as he stared into Feng Ruoxi's eyes. Feng Ruoxi dodged his gaze, not daring to meet Zhouwen's eyes. She shook her head slightly and said, "Don't ask. In short, I'm the one who let you down." Zhouwen smiled and pressed his hand on Feng Ruoxi's head. He ruffled her hair and said, "I should be the one apologizing. Someone wants to deal with me, so I implicated you, Tian Xiangdong, and Li Ji. While there's still time, find another team member. You have to get good results, otherwise I won't feel at ease. Also, help me apologize to Tian Xiangdong and Li Ji." Feng Ruoxi looked at Zhouwen in a daze. The expression on her face was mixed with shock, guilt, puzzlement, and a hint of strange emotions. "Alright, go on. I need to work hard as well." Zhouwen retracted his palm, smiled, and turned to leave. Feng Ruoxi stood there looking at Zhouwen's back. After he took a few steps, she said with a trembling body, "Zhouwen, I don't know who you have offended, but that person's power is extremely terrifying. You have to be careful." Zhouwen didn't say a word. All he did was turn his head and smile at her before continuing to walk away quickly. Zhouwen knew that he didn't have much time left. Li Ji's family background was rather ordinary, but Tian Xiangdong's family was one of the top in Guide City. As for Feng Ruoxi's family background was even better. It had long been rumored in school that her father was a high-ranking official in the city. Furthermore, he was someone with real power. To be able to influence the three of them at the same time, that person's power was definitely extraordinary. Zhouwen couldn't figure out when he had offended such a figure. However, it wasn't completely without clues when he connected it to Enjing's transfer to fight him. When he came to an empty spot, Zhou picked up his cell phone, hoping to contact his father to ask him if he had offended someone. However, there was a notification that his phone was switched off. He had no idea what Zhou Lingfeng was doing. He didn't switch it on in broad daylight. After hanging up, Zhou pondered what he should do next. What's most important now is to find 3 students who are willing to form a team with me for the combat test. Zhou frowned in thought. The combat test was different from the other subjects of the college entrance examination. This was because the combat test was held in a dimensional zone. Although it was a dimensional zone controlled by humans and wasn't too dangerous, there would still be many casualties during the test every year. Therefore, the combat test had voluntary registration and allowed one to form a team. Zhou didn't know why the League government would choose such a method of testing. Every year, when there were casualties in the combat test, the League government would be criticized on a large scale. However, the combat test continued every year without any signs of changing. Zhou didn't mind the danger. With his present strength, he could still obtain good results even if he participated in the combat test alone. However, according to the regulations of the federal government, only 4 students from the same school could participate in the test. Therefore, before the combat test registration deadline, he had to find another 3 students who were willing to team up with him. There are only a few days left before the college entrance examination. The students who are willing to participate in the combat test probably already have their own teams. Who else can I find to form a team with to participate in the test? Zhou felt vexed. He originally wanted to get into a famous school and find a stable job so that he could game in peace. However, someone didn't want to give him peace and insisted on stirring up trouble. Zhou, follow me. Just as Zhou reached the classroom's door, he was stopped by Yu Qiubai. Yu Qiubai's expression turned nasty as he brought Zhou back to his office. After locking the door, he looked at Zhou and asked with a heavy expression, "Zhou, do you know Overseer? Who is he?" Zhou asked blankly. Overseer is an honorific title that comes with an official position. His real name is Tianzhua. Do you really not know him? Yu Qiubai stared at Zhou and asked again. No. Zhou shook his head with absolute certainty. When Yu Qiubai saw that Zhou's expression didn't seem fake, he revealed a look of puzzlement. That's strange. If you don't know Overseer, why would he criticize a high school student like you when he came to Guide City for an inspection? Who exactly is Tianzhua? Zhou now roughly understood that the withdrawal of Fang Enshi and company was very likely related to Tianzhua. Yu Qiubai said with a bitter smile, "I'm only a teacher. I haven't come into contact with such a person. I've only heard the principal mention him. The Earth Federation is split into 4 districts: North, South, East, and West. Guide City is only a very small city in the East District. Although Overseer is very young, he comes from a prestigious family. He's only in his 20s, but he already holds a high position in the East District's military. He wields real power and is an impressive figure." "Teacher Yu, are you implying that Tianzhua is targeting me?" Zhou asked with a frown. "Perhaps it's not targeting you, but if he says something bad about you, those people who wish to curry favor with Overseer will think and do much more," Yu Qiubai said helplessly. "To be able to become such a high official, wouldn't he know that a single word from him can destroy a high school student's future?" Zhou said coldly. "Could this Overseer be related to Jing? From the looks of it, there's a connection. As for the exact relationship, I'm not sure either." Yu Qiubai thought for a moment and said, "It won't be too late to figure this out in the future. What's most important now is that you have to find a team to sign up for the combat test. The day after tomorrow is the deadline. Any later and it'll be too late." Zhou said somewhat helplessly, "It's already so late. The students who are interested in participating in the combat test should already have their own teams. Where else can I find people?" Besides, even if I can find one, can't they do it a second time since they were able to tear me apart once? Therefore, the teammates you are finding this time can't be ordinary students. Yu Qiubai seemed to have an idea. Not ordinary students? Zhou was slightly taken aback, unsure of what Yu Qiubai was getting at. Yu Qiubai pondered for a moment and said, "The combat test requires 4 students to freely form a team. This rule has huge loopholes and drawbacks, but the League has always insisted on using this rule. It hasn't changed for decades. Under this rule, there are many students who aren't strong themselves, but have very strong teammates. As a result, they obtain results that don't match their strength." After a pause, Yu Qiubai added, "Our school has a student named Li Xian. If you are willing to form a team with him, as long as he's willing, no one will make things difficult for you. However, in exchange, you have to do your best to help him obtain good results. Furthermore, he has to be the person with the best results in the team." "Are you saying that you want me to be Li Xian's substitute?" Zhou wasn't a fool, so he naturally understood what Yu Qiubai was getting at. If it were under normal circumstances, you naturally wouldn't have to do so. But now, although you might not be able to obtain first place in the team, you can still obtain a pretty good result. It's just that you won't be first. This is much better than not being able to participate in the combat test," Yu Qiubai said. Zhou wasn't a pedantic person. Without any hesitation, he said after some thought, "Then, I'll have to trouble you to help me contact someone, Mr. Yu. However, is there really a student named Li Xian in our school?" If Guide High School really had such a student with such an impressive background, there was no reason Zhou hadn't heard of him. Chapter 13. After coming out of Yu Qiubai's office, Zhou took out his phone and attempted to call his father, Zhou Lingfeng. After some thought, he realized that it was impossible for him to offend a figure like Tianzhua. For Tianzhua to know that he was a high school student from a small city and criticize him by name, it didn't make sense. This time, the call went through. Zhou Lingfeng's voice sounded from the phone. "Son, are you missing me so soon?" Zhou was long accustomed to Zhou Lingfeng's character, so he remained unmoved. He directly said, "Dad, do you know a person named Tianzhua?" "You're talking about Tianzhua? Of course I know him." With that said, Zhou Lingfeng exclaimed curiously, "How do you know that Tianzhua is your brother? I don't think I've introduced you to him, right?" "My brother." Zhou immediately felt his mind go blank. "That's right. Tianzhua is Little Lan's son. I married Little Lan, so he's naturally your elder brother. By the way, you also have a younger sister named Jing." Zhou didn't hear what Zhou Lingfeng said next because his mouth was agape. He didn't close it for a long time. The development had exceeded his imagination. Zhou Lingfeng had actually married such a woman. "Dad, how's your relationship with Tianzhua?" Zhou probed. "Very good. Tianzhua and Little Jing respect me very much and have a good relationship," Zhou Lingfeng answered without hesitation. Zhou understood Zhou Lingfeng's character and knew that he wasn't lying. He couldn't help but feel puzzled. If Tianzhua and Jing really have a good relationship with Zhou Lingfeng, why are they treating me like this? Could it be that they don't really approve of Dad and Ouyang Lan's marriage? Zhou could sense that Zhou Lingfeng was in a good mood and was very happy about the marriage. He didn't wish for his matters to affect Zhou Lingfeng's marriage, nor did he wish to be a burden to Zhou Lingfeng. If Tianzhua and Jing really didn't wish for Zhou Lingfeng and Ouyang Lan to marry, which was why they were treating him this way, there was even more reason for Zhou to not let this matter affect Zhou Lingfeng's marriage. Otherwise, wouldn't it be as they wished? Although he had yet to meet Tianzhua and didn't know why Tianzhua had done so, Zhou already had a very bad impression of him. "No matter how powerful the family is, it has nothing to do with me. I don't plan on taking advantage of the family. Your family shouldn't go too far." Although Zhou knew the ins and outs of the matter, it was still useless. He couldn't possibly tell others that Entienzua was displeased because his father had slept with Entienzua's mother, causing him to find him an eyesore, right? Not to mention that he couldn't say it, even if he said it, it wouldn't change his current situation. And Jing was able to defeat me in one strike, and Entienzua's words nearly made me lose the right to take the college entrance exam. At the end of the day, it's because I'm too weak. Without strength, I'm bullied. If I were an epic expert, would they be able to bully me like this? Zhouwen wasn't one to complain. He quickly put the matter aside and took out the mysterious phone to focus on grinding. The former principal of Guide High School had once evaluated Zhouwen, saying that he had never seen anyone as focused as Zhouwen. The word focus sounded like a very ordinary criticism, but to truly achieve it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Humans weren't saints. They all had emotions and would be tempted and disturbed by external objects and their own emotions. Even immortals in the heavens would have their mortal hearts stirred. Even Buddhas would be bewitched by sky fiends, much less mere mortals. Many people said that learning was difficult because they couldn't put their heart and soul into it. They couldn't focus on learning, and they couldn't maintain that state of concentration all the time. However, Zhouwen was different. No matter what he did, no matter what environment he was in, he could easily enter a focused state. He could fully devote himself, making it difficult for him to be affected by external factors. This was why the former principal had made such an evaluation of Yu Qiubai. In-game, Zhouwen summoned his companion beast, mutated vigor ant. Although it also had 9 constitution, the fellow's carapace was hard and its defense was much stronger than Zhouwen's. The blood-colored avatar rode the mutated vigor ant as it charged through the ant nest. There was no need to worry even if it was surrounded by a horde of vigor ants. The mutated vigor ant struck out with its 2 front claws, killing ordinary vigor ants with a single punch. With its hard carapace, it remained invincible amidst the horde of vigor ants. It would be great if I could have a spear. Zhouwen realized that the blood-colored avatar was riding on the mutated vigor ant's back. Due to the distance, it was difficult for him to attack the surrounding vigor ants. All he could do was jump off the mutated vigor ant's back and fight alongside it. Ever since he obtained the mysterious phone, Zhouwen had never had such a great time grinding. The man and ant were practically unstoppable as they charged forward. When they encountered mutated vigor ants, they could join forces to quickly slay them. In the past, Zhouwen could only grind in the area ahead. He would be surrounded and killed before he could reach the back. Now, he was able to charge forward and quickly leave the area he had previously been in. After killing so many vigor ants, although 2-dimensional crystals dropped, their levels were very low. Zhouwen only replenished his energy after absorbing them. Ding! After killing another mutated vigor ant, Zhouwen heard another familiar sound. He took a careful look and was immediately delighted. The dimensional crystal that dropped this time was a vigor ant crystal at the 9th level. Zhouwen controlled the blood-colored avatar to pick up the vigor ant crystal and immediately felt an electric current surge through his body, forming an intense electric current cycle. His vigor divine fist, which was originally at rank 7, instantly rose to rank 9. The might of rank 9 vigor divine fist increased once again, but the expenditure of primordial energy also increased. Using it once drained 5 primordial energy, and Zhouwen only had 9 primordial energy. He wasn't able to use Vigor Divine Fist a second time in a short period of time. After reaping the rewards, Zhouwen immersed himself in grinding even more. The man and ant engaged in a frenzied killing spree in the ant nest as they headed deeper into the nest. The ant nest was like a gigantic underground maze. Zhouwen didn't see an end despite charging for nearly 2 hours. The cave ahead of him widened as the passageway became as wide as a large warehouse. Chapter 14. That flying silver ant can't be a legendary dimensional creature, right? Zhouwen thought. He originally wanted to revive the blood-colored avatar and take a look at the spot where the silver flying ant had appeared, but when he looked at the time, it was almost noon. Zhou had no choice but to give up for now. Although Yu Qiubai had tacitly agreed that he didn't need to attend class, he had arranged for Zhou to meet Li Xian at noon, so he had to make the trip. Zhou originally imagined that they would meet in school, but to his surprise, Yu Qiubai drove Zhou away from school after school and brought him to a private clubhouse on the east side of the city. Li Xian's character is a little flamboyant, but he's not a bad person. You are only here for the test. Don't take anything else to heart, Yu Qiubai exhorted Zhou meaningfully before entering the private clubhouse. Teacher Yu, don't worry. I know what to do. Zhou nodded. Although Zhou was already mentally prepared, he was still slightly surprised when he saw Li Xian in a luxurious room. A 16 or 17-year-old youth was sitting on a spacious sofa. His clothes were disheveled and he looked sloppy. Beauties surrounded him, all of them dressed in sexy clothes, revealing their snow-white thighs and faintly discernible ample breasts. Some were twisting their bodies and dancing, some were rubbing themselves against the youth, while others were snuggling in his arms and feeding him alcohol. The atmosphere in the room was rather fiery. "Old Yu, have a drink," the youth said loudly as he raised his glass when he saw Yu Qiubai. "Forget the alcohol. I still have classes in the afternoon." Yu Qiubai didn't seem surprised, as though he hadn't seen the sexy women. He pointed at Zhou and introduced, "Li Xian, this is the Zhou I told you about. He's very capable, and should be of help to your result. Old Yu, don't worry. On your account, I'll let him follow me. It won't be a problem for him to get good results," Li Xian said flippantly as he downed the alcohol in his glass. "I'm relieved to hear that. I still have classes, so I'll head back to school first. Discuss the combat test with Zhou," Yu Qiubai said. "Old Yu, are you really not going to have a drink? The alcohol and women here are really good." Li Xian chuckled as he pinched the woman's ample breasts, causing her to pout. "Thank you for your kindness, but I still have class, so I'll head back first." Yu Qiubai waved his hand and said to Zhou, "I'll help you settle the registration. Stay here for the next few days and familiarize yourself with Li Xian and company. That way, you'll be more confident during the combat test." "Teacher Yu, thank you." Zhou was somewhat touched. Yu Qiubai wasn't related to him, so he was very grateful that he had risked offending and Tianzhua to help him. "If you can get into a famous school and make a name for yourself in the future, you'll be able to live up to the old principal and me." Yu Qiubai patted Zhou on the shoulder and said with a smile, "All right, I'll return to school first. Discuss the details with Li Xian." After Yu Qiubai left, Zhou looked at Li Xian, who was still reveling in the beauty's embrace, and said, "Do you want to invite the other 2 team members to do some coordination training before the test begins?" Li Xian narrowed his eyes at Zhou and said, "Zhou, right? I've heard of you. Guide High School's #1 genius." "It's just nonsense. Don't take it seriously," Zhou said. "That's right. How can a small place like Guide City have any true geniuses? If there were any geniuses, they wouldn't have been defeated by Anjing in one strike." Li Xian said languidly, "There's no need for coordination. I'm letting you join my team purely on account of Old Yu. When the time comes, all you need to do is follow behind us obediently and not cause trouble." "Sure," Zhou said indifferently. "Do you know how to drink? If you can finish this bottle, you can choose any of these chicks." Li Xian placed a bottle of alcohol in front of Zhou. "I don't drink." Zhou shook his head. "Then do whatever you want." Li Xian found it a little boring and ignored Zhou. He minded his own business and began having fun. Zhou found a spot in the corner and sat down. He took out his phone and began playing on it, continuing his grind. Zhou originally had no interest in staying, but since Yu Qiubai had made him stay, it wasn't right for him to leave. All he could do was stay and game. When Li Xian saw Zhou gaming on the sofa in the corner without moving, he belittled him even more. He gave up on himself after suffering a little setback. Old Yu lowered his pride to beg me for such a useless fellow. It's really not worth it. Suddenly, Li Xian's heart stirred as he whispered into the ear of a sexy and enchanting girl beside him. You're so naughty, the girl cursed jokingly as she walked towards Zhou Wen while twisting her hips. Zhou Wen was frantically grinding, hoping to rush back to where the silver-winged flying ant was to see what level the dimensional creature was. Just as he was getting into the swing of grinding, he suddenly felt something soft stick to his arm. Then, he heard a sweet voice sound in his ear. Sweetie, what game is this? Is it fun? It's fun. Zhou Wen didn't even raise his head as he continued grinding ants. After all, even if others saw the game's content, the cartoonish style of the game made it difficult to connect it to a dangerous dimensional zone. Furthermore, Zhou Wen had never heard of a dimensional zone like the ant nest. Seeing that Zhou Wen was ignoring her, the girl subconsciously bit her lips. She pulled down her collar, which wasn't high to begin with, further accentuating her snow-white fullness. Then, she reached out her hand to caress Zhou Wen's cheek. With a slight force, she tilted Zhou Wen's face towards her. She brought her red lips to Zhou Wen's ear and said in a charming voice, Is the game fun or me fun? As Li Xian drank, he watched Zhou Wen's reaction with interest. He thought to himself, this gaming nerd Zhou Wen has probably never touched a woman's body, much less a seductive woman like Little Ye. Will he have a nosebleed later? Little Ye originally only wanted to gently turn Zhou Wen's cheek. Typically, under such circumstances, a man would take the initiative to look at her. But this time, she felt that Zhou Wen's face was motionless like a rock. His eyes were still staring intently at the phone screen. Little Ye was somewhat infuriated as she used strength in her palm to forcefully turn Zhou Wen's face. As she used too much strength, Zhou Wen's cheek deformed from the pressure. Zhou Wen was grinding and didn't wish to be distracted. The blood-colored avatar was in the midst of the vigor ants. A moment of distraction could lead to death. That was a drop of blood. In the past month, Zhou Wen had been gaming with his blood. He had lost too much blood and was beginning to suffer from anemia. He didn't wish to waste a single drop. Chapter 15. Zhou Wen was forced to move his gaze away from the phone screen as he immediately frowned. He had just happened to see a mutated vigor ant charge at him. If he didn't quickly control the blood-colored avatar to fight it, it would likely be game over. Zhou Wen didn't think too much about it. All he wanted was to quickly turn his gaze back to his phone screen. He reached out a hand and pressed it against Xiaoya's face, giving her a slight push. At the same time, he said, Don't disturb my gaming. Zhou Wen didn't use much strength, but he had forgotten that his strength had increased significantly during this period of time. Xiaoya hadn't cultivated much, so her physique was inferior to the typical high school students. This was originally just a casual push, but it pushed Xiaoya's entire body backward, and she fell on the ground with a plop. Pft! Upon seeing Zhou Wen push Xiaoya to the ground with a look of disdain, Li Xian spewed out the mouthful of alcohol he had just drunk as he coughed incessantly. The room instantly fell silent as the 8 sexy girls looked at Zhou Wen as though he was a monster. Xiaoya was half collapsed to the ground with a look of disbelief. Instantly, she looked aggrieved and furious. As she got up, she cursed. What's there to be proud of? Serves you right to be single your entire life. Zhou Wen was focused on killing the mutated vigor ant, so he didn't notice anything else. He ignored her and continued typing on his phone. Upon seeing Xiaoya's aggrieved look, Li Xian was amused. This punk is quite interesting. Xiaoya was the top hostess of this private clubhouse. Although her bearing and other aspects couldn't be compared to the top beauties in big cities, her figure was impeccable. Even Li Xian felt that apart from her bearing and mannerisms lacking, Xiaoya was pretty good in every other aspect. Even Li Xian was rather infatuated with her. However, the way Zhou Wen had pushed Xiaoya down with a look of disdain amused Li Xian. If this punk isn't a natural straight man, it's highly likely that he's been traumatized by that woman, Jing. It's causing him to develop an aversion to women, Li Xian thought maliciously. Zhou kept gaming and soon, Li Xian lost interest in him. He minded his own business and began having fun. The entire clubhouse's top floor had been booked by Li Xian. There, he had everything. Li Xian ignored Zhou, and Zhou was happy with the peace and quiet. He kept grinding in-game. After charging for more than an hour, Zhou once again arrived at the spot where he had encountered the silver-winged flying ant. Indeed, he saw the flying ant with its silver wings and body that seemed to be made of silver. The flying ant was extremely fast. Even though Zhou was prepared, he didn't last long before the silver-winged flying ant pierced through his chest. The silver-winged flying ant was just too fast and agile in midair. Like a bat, it could change directions at will. Zhou's vigor divine fist was unable to hit it. Although the silver-winged flying ant is powerful, it shouldn't have reached the legendary stage. It's not impossible to kill it, but I'll need to plan carefully, Zhou thought. From what he could see he want to say, strength E, God I to E was, and King rank 9 vigor divine fist was likely enough to injure the silver-winged flying ant, but it was useless if he couldn't touch it. Furthermore, the ant horde affected Zhou greatly. Although Zhou and the mutated vigor ant weren't afraid of being besieged by a large horde of vigor ants, it severely affected their range of movement. It made it difficult for Zhou to dodge the silver-winged flying ant's attacks. From the looks of it, to kill the silver-winged flying ant, I have to finish it the instant it closes in on me. However, such an opportunity isn't easy to grasp. Zhou entered the game again. As he stormed towards the silver-winged flying ant, he pondered over how to seize the opportunity to counterattack. After more than an hour, Zhou once again arrived in front of the silver-winged flying ant. At the instant it reached the blood-colored avatar's head, Zhou activated Vigor Divine Fist in a bid to kill it. However, the silver-winged flying ant's body twisted strangely when it was less than half a foot away from Zhou's fist. While dodging the Vigor Divine Fist, its blade-like claw cleaved off the blood-colored avatar's head from behind. Zhou made repeated attempts, but they all ended in failure. The silver-winged flying ant was just too agile. His Vigor Divine Fist couldn't touch it at all. The only time he struck the silver-winged flying ant was when Zhou used Inch Punch. He had punched it when it was extremely close to him, allowing him to hit it. However, Inch Punch didn't have the augmentation of a primordial energy skill, so it didn't have much of an effect on the silver-winged flying ant. Without using Vigor Divine Fist, it was impossible to seriously injure the silver-winged flying ant. If only Vigor Divine Fist could exert strength like Inch Punch. That way, I wouldn't need to spend so much time swinging my arm. I'd have the chance to blast it to death the instant the silver-winged flying ant closed in on me. Unfortunately, Vigor Divine Fist is a skill in the game. That's not right. The game character and my body are the same. If my body can use Vigor Divine Fist like Inch Punch, allowing me to release strength at short distances, then the game character should be able to do so as well. With this in mind, Zhou put away his phone and began studying how to use Inch Punch to deliver Vigor Divine Fist. Vigor Divine Fist was a primordial energy skill that unleashed its power. When unleashing it, one's arm would retreat by a large margin. This was somewhat different from Inch Punch, so it was clearly very difficult to change Vigor Divine Fist's punching method to that of Inch Punch. Zhou made repeated attempts. Although it was very difficult, he wasn't willing to give up. When Li Xian woke up after a nap, he saw Zhou punching again and again in a corner as though he was practicing punching. He didn't notice it in the beginning, believing that Zhou was tired from gaming and was stretching his muscles. But after 2 hours, he realized that Zhou was still punching. He couldn't help but size him up carefully. This is Inch Punch? but the way he exerts his strength and the range of his movements are too great. His training is just too poor. Li Xian lost interest after watching for a while. Zhou Wen's punches were a little odd. In the 2 days before the college entrance exam, Zhou Wen constantly attempted to fuse vigor divine fist and inch punch. He vaguely grasped an opportunity, but he wasn't able to fully grasp it. In a blink of an eye, it was time for the college entrance exam. The first 3 days were for the ordinary college entrance exam. Yu Qiubai delivered the admission pass, and Zhou Wen and Li Xian headed to their respective exam venues to complete their exams. On the 4th day, Zhou Wen came to the venue for the combat test and met up with Li Xian. The combat test was conducted in a dimensional zone. As every dimensional zone was different, the combat test in different regions was different. Chapter 16. The vegetation outside the ancient city was abnormally lush. The willow trees by the moat's banks grew more than 10 meters tall. Even the ordinary grass by the roadside grew to half a person's height. The surface of the river was covered in lotus leaves the size of small boats. The lotus flowers bloomed larger than basins, revealing a demonic red color as though they were dyed with blood. Affected by the dimensional zone, the nearby flora and fauna experienced varying degrees of mutation. However, the mutation wasn't as serious as the one in the dimensional zone. There were armed troops stationed outside the ancient city. There were also tanks patrolling the vicinity. Without a pass, no one was allowed to enter the ancient city. There were even surface-to-air missiles deployed in the vicinity, but Zhou Wen had never seen them launch. In fact, the threat that firearms posed to dimensional creatures was very limited. Even if a nuclear bomb exploded in a dimensional zone, it would hardly cause too much damage. Many dimensional creatures could even absorb the energy produced by the nuclear bomb to evolve, becoming even more terrifying. Ordinary bullets were even more useless. They would be devoured and fused with dimensional creatures when they hit them. Only bullets made of special materials could deal damage to dimensional creatures. However, those materials were very rare to begin with. It was too wasteful to make single-use bullets, so they were typically used to make cold weapons like sabers and swords. Firearms and explosives weren't very effective against dimensional creatures, but they were still very lethal against humans. Therefore, the main purpose of firearms and explosives was to maintain human social order. Zhou Wen didn't have a pass, but the pass he had was a pass in disguise. During the combat test, he had a chance to team up and enter Guide Ancient City through the North Gate. Guide Ancient City had 4 gates: east, west, south, and north. It was originally a small city, with a circumference of less than 5 kilometers. However, after the dimensional storms, Guide Ancient City had become a dimensional zone. The space inside was many times larger than before. Humans had yet to fully explore the entire Guide Ancient City. The dimensional creatures one encountered from the 4 gates were somewhat different. The dimensional creatures at the North Gate were the weakest. As long as one didn't venture too deep, there typically wouldn't be too much danger. As the pass only allowed 4 people to enter together, Li Xian and the other 2 team members Zhou Wen had never met hadn't arrived. Furthermore, it wasn't time to enter, so all Zhou Wen could do was stand outside the ancient city's gates and wait. The northern gate of the ancient city was ancient and mysterious. The green bricks on the gate tower were mottled and worn, and many places had already decayed. However, Zhou Wen had heard that the army had once bombarded Guide Ancient City with a large number of missiles. The missiles had bombarded the city for more than 10 minutes, but not a single tile had shattered from the seemingly decaying ancient city tower. The plaque above the city gate was engraved with the words Guide City. It was ancient and bold, as though it had a 1,000-year-old history lingering in it. Zhou Wen's gaze finally landed on a strange pattern behind the signboard. The pattern looked like a small hand-shaped dent left by a baby's palm on a brick, but within the dent, there was a carving that looked like a garlic or onion. Guide ancient city naturally didn't have such a pattern in the past. It was said that after the dimensional storms, the strange pattern appeared behind the door plaque. However, no one knew what it meant, nor did they know who had carved it. As Zhou was sizing up the pattern, he suddenly felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. Zhou imagined that it was Yu Qiubai or Li Xian looking for him, but when he reached out to grab the phone in his pocket, he was taken aback. This was because the phone in his pocket wasn't the ordinary phone he usually used, but the mysterious phone. The mysterious phone didn't have the function to accept calls, nor had it ever vibrated. Why was it suddenly like this? Seeing that no one was paying attention to him, Zhou took out his phone from his pocket and saw that the screen had automatically lit up. A camera icon was flashing. Why haven't I seen this camera program before? What's the use of this? Is it for me to take a selfie? Zhou was puzzled as he tapped on the camera icon. Just like an ordinary phone, the phone entered camera mode. However, it wasn't Zhou who was taking pictures, but the rear camera. Thankfully, photography wasn't prohibited in the ancient city. The soldiers on guard didn't stop Zhou when they saw him take a picture with his phone. Zhou raised his phone and aimed it at the plants beside him, hoping to see what the camera function was for. However, Zhou soon realized that the camera function seemed to be broken. There was no way to press the shutter to take pictures. Zhou tapped the phone screen with his finger, but the phone continued taking pictures without any reaction. What the hell is this? Zhou raised his phone and waved it around. When the tiny palm symbol on the city gate appeared on the camera, he heard a beep as the phone reacted. Zhou was alarmed as he took a careful look and realized that a tiny green frame had appeared on the screen. It had locked onto the strange palm symbol on the city gate. After 3 consecutive beeps, the tiny palm symbol enlarged on the screen. The ancient city behind it gradually turned blurry as a line of words appeared beneath it. Loading, could it be? Zhou looked at the screen that maintained the loading mode as a thought flashed through his mind. This thought gave him a fright as he found it unbelievable. However, it didn't take long for the phone to prove his guess. After the loading was completed, the tiny palm symbol turned into an icon that appeared on the phone's home screen. It stopped beside the ant nest icon, and beneath it were the words, Ancient Imperial City. It really became a game dungeon? Zhou was pleasantly surprised as he held back his excitement and tapped on the Ancient Imperial City icon. Indeed, the phone screen turned into the game loading screen that Zhou was familiar with. Moments later, the game screen changed to Guide Ancient City's North Gate. Unlike reality, the North Gate's door was already open. Zhou secretly dripped a drop of blood on the phone's screen and transformed into the blood-colored avatar in-game before walking straight into the city. There were ancient stone streets and ancient wooden buildings that exuded an ancient charm. Although Zhou had never entered Guide Ancient City before, he had seen videos of the ancient city on the internet. It was identical to what he was seeing now. Before Zhou could continue comparing, a skeleton with a bone club in hand and tattered clothes on its body appeared on the stone street. It ran towards the blood-colored avatar. Chapter 17. Skeleton soldiers were relatively weak dimensional creatures. They weren't fast or strong, and their physiques were weak. Schools had taught them how to deal with skeleton soldiers. As long as the typical high school student's cultivation wasn't too bad, dealing with 1 or 2 skeleton soldiers wouldn't be a problem. Although Zhou had never fought a real skeleton soldier, he could tell that it was much weaker than a vigor ant. He didn't know its strength or physique, but its speed was at most at level 3. He controlled the blood-colored avatar to charge forward as the skeleton soldier smashed down with its club. However, it was too slow. Before the bone club could hit the blood-colored avatar, it was smashed into smithereens, reducing it to a pile of bone dregs. Ding! Among the broken bones on the ground, a dimensional crystal dropped. Zhou took a careful look and realized that it was a skeleton soldier crystal. Zhouwen was pleasantly surprised. The drop rate of primordial energy skill crystals was just too low. It could be considered lucky to have one drop the moment he started. Unfortunately, it's only a skeleton soldier primordial energy skill. According to the school's information, the skeleton soldier's primordial energy skill is skeleton palm. It can only increase one's strength slightly, but the effects aren't very strong. Furthermore, they are typically low-rank primordial energy skills at rank 1. Zhouwen felt somewhat disappointed when he recalled the school's information. He controlled the blood-colored avatar to pick up the skeleton soldier crystal. Immediately, the crystal transformed into a grayish-white stream that drilled into the blood-colored avatar's body. At the same time, Zhouwen felt a cold aura enter his palm through his phone before circulating through his body, forming a strange primordial energy circulation route. Obtained primordial energy skill. Skeleton palm, rank 1. Consumes 1 primordial energy point. Skeleton palm only consumes 1 primordial energy point. It's much less than Vigor Divine Fist. However, its strength is much weaker. It should be one of the weakest primordial energy skills. Zhouwen knew that the more primordial energy a primordial energy skill expended, the stronger it was. A primordial energy skill that only expended 1 primordial energy point was definitely weak. It wasn't convenient to test the might of skeleton palm here, so Zhouwen controlled the blood-colored avatar to continue walking into Ancient Imperial City. Zhouwen didn't know why Guide Ancient City was called Ancient Sovereign City in-game. Based on what he knew, Guide City was an ancient city with a long history. In ancient times, it had names like Ingtian and Shang. Its history could be traced back to the mythical era of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. Among the 5 emperors, the great Emperor Xuanxu once built his capital here, but he later moved the capital to Diqiu. The head of the 3 emperors, Suirenshi, was born here. Among the 5 emperors, Emperor Ku and his son Qianhua were also born here. The name Emperor Ku might sound unfamiliar to most people, but the original form of the heavenly Emperor Dijun in the classic of mountains and seas was Emperor Ku. These were only legends. No one knew if they really existed. However, ever since the dimensional storms, Guide Ancient City had become a dimensional zone. To this day, it had yet to be fully explored. A few years ago, a powerful human at the epic stage had charged deep into Guide Ancient City, but he vanished without a trace. From then on, no one dared to venture deeper. After decades of evolution, the strongest human was only at the half-step mythical stage. There had never been a true mythical expert. Although it was said to be half-step mythical, it was actually only at the pinnacle of the epic stage. For such an expert to never return, it was obvious how terrifying the depths of the ancient city were. Thankfully, dimensional zones seemed to have powerful restrictions. It was difficult for the creatures within the zone to charge out. Otherwise, human society would have long been turned upside down. It wouldn't have been as peaceful as it was now. Summoning the mutated Vigor Ant, the man and ant charged deep into ancient sovereign city. From time to time, skeleton soldiers would charge at them, but they were easily slain by the man and ant. However, apart from the first skeleton soldier they encountered after entering, no other crystals dropped. The drop rate of skeleton soldiers was even lower than the Vigor Ant. In-game, Zhouwen tested the might of skeleton palm. Indeed, it was much weaker than Vigor Divine Fist. It could only increase his strength by about 10 to 20%. It was much weaker than Tian Xiangdong's Lightning Fist. However, skeleton palm had an advantage. Its strength was gentle and the range of force exertion was small. It wasn't as wide as Vigor Divine Fist, and its palm technique was extremely nimble. Skeleton palm is more suitable for fusing with inch punch. However, skeleton palm's might is too low. Even if the fusion succeeds, the damage it can deal to the silver-winged flying ant will be limited. As Zhouwen pondered, he sensed someone walking towards him. There were many students waiting for the combat test to begin. However, Zhouwen had chosen a corner, so it was highly likely that someone was looking for him. Thankfully, there weren't many skeleton soldiers. The mutated vigor ant was enough to deal with them, so it wasn't a problem for Zhouwen to be slightly distracted. He looked up to take a look. Zhouwen originally imagined that it was Li Xian, but when he saw who it was, he was slightly taken aback. The person was Jing, who he hadn't seen since defeating Zhouwen in one strike. And Jing wasn't a girl with a modern aesthetic. She didn't have a sharp chin, double eyelids, or a high nose bridge. Her looks were more of a classical beauty. She had a tiny nose and a handsome face with some baby fat. Her eyes resembled a cat's, and her gaze was firm and forceful. She was slightly taller than Feng Ruoxi, about the same height as Zhouwen. To boys, a girl of this height was very oppressive, especially in Jing. She seemed to have an aura that prevented strangers from approaching her. Boys with slightly weaker willpower probably didn't dare look her in the eye. And Jing walked straight in front of Zhouwen and, without waiting for him to say a word, she threw a USB drive at him. "What's this?" Zhouwen caught the USB drive and asked Jing in puzzlement. "Uncle Feng got me to give it to you," Jing said as she glanced at the phone in Zhouwen's hand. As Jing spoke, she glanced at the phone in Zhouwen's hand and said in a mocking tone, "However, I think Uncle Feng's efforts have been in vain. It's useless to give a degenerate person anything good. It's just a waste." Without waiting for Zhouwen to say a word, Jing turned around and left. After taking a few steps, she stopped and said without turning her head, "In the future, don't tell others that you are a member of our family. Our family doesn't have such weak and useless people." With that said, Jing left without looking back. After leaving the security zone, she boarded a vehicle with a military license plate and left. Zhouwen watched the military vehicle leave in a daze before shaking his head and muttering to himself, "I'm not a member of your family to begin with, nor do I have any plans to bask in your family's glory. Aren't you overthinking things?" After casually placing the USB drive into his pocket, Zhouwen continued grinding the ancient Imperial City dungeon, constantly hunting skeleton soldiers. Even if nothing good dropped, it was good to familiarize himself with ancient Imperial City's environment. Chapter 18. If Zhouwen didn't have his phone and game dungeons, he wouldn't have ventured deep into the ancient city. It would be a joke with his life, and there was no need for it. But now, things were different. He could venture deep into the game dungeons and figure out the situation in ancient Imperial City before entering the ancient city himself. Naturally, it would be a walk in the park and reduce the risk. It was similar to the information and map provided by the school. The area near the North City Gate was filled with skeleton soldiers. These skeleton soldiers were only slightly stronger than adult men who had never cultivated. Against high school students who had cultivated, they would only suffer a beating. Unless one courted death by charging into a horde of skeleton soldiers, they typically wouldn't be in too much danger. Zhouwen, on the other hand, had no such qualms. He got the blood-colored avatar to charge forward on the mutated vigor ant. Even if he encountered a horde of more than 10 skeleton soldiers, the mutated vigor ant could easily blast them to smithereens. There was no need for Zhouwen to control the blood-colored avatar to do anything. Soon, Zhouwen rushed out of the map provided by the school. The ancient city was filled with stone-paved streets and ancient buildings. The deeper one went, the older the buildings became. Zhouwen only dared to proceed along the streets, not daring to enter the ancient buildings on either side. The knowledge taught in school repeatedly mentioned that it was best not to enter the buildings in dimensional zones. Many of the buildings were connected to dimensional rifts, so entering them was very likely to cause one to get lost in the dimensional zones. The drop rate of skeleton soldiers was just too low. Zhouwen had killed at least 200 skeleton soldiers, but apart from the first skeleton soldier, not a single hair had dropped. Zhouwen wasn't surprised by this. He had previously heard that skeleton soldiers were too low in level, so it was rare for them to condense dimensional crystals. Although the skeleton palm was weak, there weren't many who could obtain skeleton palm crystals. As he pondered, he suddenly saw a horde of skeleton soldiers on the stone street ahead. There were about 20 to 30 of them. This was the largest horde of skeleton soldiers Zhou had seen since he entered. Unlike the skeleton soldiers from before, the horde of skeleton soldiers was clustered around a skeleton general riding a skeleton horse and wielding a bone spear. The skeleton general riding the skeleton horse was clearly taller and more muscular than the typical skeleton soldier. He was at least a head taller than the typical skeleton soldier. Furthermore, his bones were especially thick. They weren't the ordinary grayish-white color, but they suffused a luster that resembled ivory. The armor on his body was tattered, but he had a dark red cloak draped over his back. Although it was a bit tattered, it was still intact. The bone spear was more than 2 meters long. The body of the spear was somewhat uneven, but the spear tip was as sharp as a thorn. Moreover, it had a bone groove. If one was stabbed by the bone spear, it was likely that they would bleed profusely. When Zhou saw him, he also saw the blood-colored avatar and mutated vigor ant under Zhou's control. However, he didn't pounce forward like ordinary dimensional creatures. He remained seated on the skeleton horse, as though he couldn't be bothered to take action. As for the skeleton soldiers, they charged forward like wolves and tigers. The mutated vigor ant brandished its front claws like 2 grim reapers' size. With a single swipe, it sliced through the skeleton soldiers' bodies. Moments later, it had killed nearly 10 skeleton soldiers. The fellow riding the skeleton horse finally couldn't hold it in any longer. He roared at the sky, letting out a terrifying cry that made one's teeth wince. Then, he urged the horse to charge forward. The skeleton horse's speed was far greater than the typical skeleton soldiers. It even surprised Zhou. Its speed was much faster than the mutated vigor ant and the blood-colored avatar. It galloped over like a tornado, in no way slower than the silver-winged flying ant. In a blink of an eye, the skeleton horse had arrived in front of the mutated vigor ant. Zhou ordered the mutated vigor ant to brandish its claws to meet the spear. He wanted to use its claws to control the bone spear before letting the blood-colored avatar leap over to strike his head. However, to his surprise, the bone spear sped up. The tip of the spear turned blurry in Zhou's vision, as though it had vanished for an instant. By the time Zhou could see it clearly again, the bone spear had penetrated the mutated vigor ant's claws and stabbed into the blood-colored avatar's chest. Blood splattered as the blood-colored avatar tumbled off the mutated vigor ant's back. The game screen turned black as well. Clearly, it had been killed in one shot. It's that ferocious? Zhou was somewhat delighted. It was only difficult when there was a challenge. Killing the ordinary skeleton soldiers was meaningless, nor did they drop anything good. Just as he was about to restart the game, he saw Li Xian walking over with 2 youths about the same age. Zhou had never seen the 2 youths before. They didn't look like students from Guide High School. It was highly likely that they were like Li Xian, students in Guide High School in name but not actually attending school. When we enter the ancient city, you don't need to do anything. Just stay by my side. Leave the rest to them. Li Xian had no intention of introducing Zhou to the 2 youths. All he did was exhort him casually. All right. Zhou nodded in agreement. Since he could easily pass the combat test, he had no intention of stealing the limelight. Seeing that the 2 youths had no intention of greeting him, Zhou was happy to relax. He stood by the side and continued gaming. The 2 youths were discussing the combat test with Li Xian, repeatedly assuring him not to worry. With them around, Li Xian would definitely get first in Guide City's combat test. From their tone, getting first in Guide City's combat test was as simple as eating or drinking. That's all talk, but you have to do it well. There can't be any mistakes. I'm determined to get first in Guide City's combat test, Li Xian said. Brother Xian, don't worry. How can a tiny place like Guide City have any true experts? Ignoring the fact that Jiang Hao and I are working together, even if it's just me alone, I can still guarantee you first place, Su Miantu said indifferently. Upon seeing Li Xian frown slightly, Jiang Hao hurriedly said, Brother Xian, don't worry. We will do our best and guarantee that nothing will go wrong. That's good. Only then did Li Xian nod slightly. Su Miantu was just about to say something when he saw someone walking over. The four of them turned around and saw that the person who came was a tall beauty. Their eyes couldn't help but light up. Zhouwen, it's great that you found a team. Fang Ruoshi walked in front of Zhouwen and said with some relief. Zhouwen smiled and said, I have to thank Li Xian. Thanks to him, I was able to participate in the combat test. Fang Ruoshi didn't know Li Xian, much less Su Miantu or Jiang Hao. However, the fact that Zhouwen was able to participate in the combat test was a weight lifted off her shoulders. She said with a smile, I originally wanted to vie for first place, but since you are here, it looks like there's no hope of getting first place. Su Miantu was somewhat unhappy when he heard that. Fang Ruoshi made it sound as though they were taking advantage of Zhouwen by teaming up with him. Chapter 19. Fang Ruoshi glanced at Su Miantu but ignored him. She looked at Zhouwen and asked, Zhouwen, which school do you plan on applying for? I haven't decided yet, Zhouwen said. Fang Ruoshi nodded and said, That's right. With your abilities, you can choose any school you want. There's no rush. All right, I'll do my best to complete the test. I hope I won't be too far behind you. With that said, Fang Ruoshi waved her hand at Zhouwen and turned to leave. She ignored Su Miantu the entire time. Su Miantu was pissed, but he couldn't flare up in such a place. All he did was shoot a glance at Zhouwen and say to Jiang Hao and Li Xian, People from small places sure are ignorant. What a waste of their good looks. Unfortunately, they lack brains and taste. Jiang Hao didn't say a word, but Li Xian's interest in Zhouwen was piqued. He looked at Zhouwen and asked, I heard that you were once the #1 genius of Guide High School. From the looks of it, it's true. That chick seems to idolize you. It's just a form of encouragement between classmates. She's excellent to begin with, in no way inferior to me. She's a rare cultivation genius no matter where she goes, Zhouwen said. Su Miantu could naturally tell that Zhouwen was rebutting him, so he said disdainfully, If you were really that excellent, why would you need us to bring you along? Li Xian didn't tell Su Miantu and company about Zhouwen. All he said was that he was helping a friend by bringing a student to participate in the combat test. Zhouwen didn't defend himself, nor did he care to argue with Su Miantu. Li Xian cut off Su Miantu, who was about to say something else. All right, cut it out. It's time to enter. Keep your spirits up. With Li Xian's command, Su Miantu could only swallow the words he was about to say. All he could do was glare at Zhouwen unhappily. The invigilators had already begun to verify the students' qualifications for the exam. They were divided into teams of 4, and each team brought their admission pass through the machine. The machine collected their fingerprints, scanned the admission pass and the items on their bodies, and confirmed that they were the ones on the name list, as well as not carrying any cheating items. Only when all 4 of them were present would they be allowed to enter the ancient city. Most of the students weren't nervous. Instead, it was the family members who had sent them to participate in the combat test. They were so nervous that they nearly fainted. They watched helplessly as the students entered the ancient city, as though they were about to have a heart attack. Zhouwen and company lined up to pass the test. They passed through the protective net and arrived in front of the ancient city's entrance. The gate to the ancient city was already open, but there seemed to be a mass of fog inside. No matter how hard he looked, he couldn't see what was inside the ancient city. Stop looking. Hurry up and go in. There are still people queuing up behind us, urged the heavily armed soldiers guarding the gate of the ancient city. Zhouwen followed Li Xian and company to the ancient city's entrance. Seeing Li Xian and company walk into the ancient city, he followed closely behind them. However, when the three of them walked through the door, he couldn't see them. He hurriedly walked into the fog of the door and immediately felt a strange sense of dizziness. He had goosebumps all over his body. However, with just one step, the scene in front of Zhou Wen suddenly opened up. The fog in the ancient city seemed to vanish. He could clearly see the stone streets and the various ancient buildings with blue tiles and red walls on both sides of the street. Li Xian and company were walking in front of him, just a few steps away. Those scientists speculated that dimensional zones are equivalent to another spatial dimension. From the looks of it, it does make sense, Zhou Wen thought. After most of the students entered, they curiously sized up the ancient city like Zhou Wen. Although they had already seen some images of Guide Ancient City in the school's videos, it was a completely different feeling when they were actually here. The ancientness and vicissitudes were something that videos couldn't capture. The invigilator gathered all the students for the exam and informed them of some matters to take note of. Then, the combat test officially began. All the students who were participating in the test rushed to the streets and alleys of the ancient city, hoping to kill the most skeleton soldiers and obtain a better result. Of course, there were also people who held onto a sliver of hope. It would be even better if a few dimensional crystals dropped during the test. The Earth Federation had clearly confirmed that the dimensional crystals dropped by students during the combat test belonged to the students themselves. However, the invigilator had also made it very clear that everything that happened during the combat test was borne by the students themselves. According to the Federation's laws, after becoming an adult at the age of 16, one could freely choose whether to participate in the combat test. The responsibility was also borne by the students themselves. Even if they died, the Federation wouldn't give them a single cent of compensation. Unlike the other subjects that were filled with people, there were only a few hundred students participating in the combat test in a city. In the ancient city after the mutation, it didn't stand out at all. Zhou Wen followed Li Xian and company into the depths of the ancient city. In the beginning, there were too many students, so the skeleton soldiers that appeared weren't enough to kill. Li Xian and company had no intention of snatching the other students, so they circled around the battlefield and headed deep into the ancient city. Su Miantu and Jiang Hao led the way. When they encountered skeleton soldiers, they were basically defeated in one strike. The horde of skeleton soldiers couldn't withstand a single blow and were indeed powerful. Among the skeleton soldiers' skeletons, there was a bone the size of a rice grain. Each skeleton soldier only had one such bone. By collecting this bone, the combat test score was determined by the number of bones. However, the number of bones only determined the team's ranking. The ranking of the four in the team was determined by the number of dimensional crystals. It was unknown if it was a coincidence, but the quartet headed in the direction that Zhou Wen had attempted in-game. As they charged forward, all the scenery was identical to in-game. It wasn't only the ancient buildings in the ancient city. Even the number of skeleton soldiers that appeared was identical to in-game. If that's the case, won't we encounter the guy riding the skeleton horse later? Zhou Wen thought about it again. It was already outside the test zone, so it was unlikely that Li Xian and company would take the risk to head there. However, things exceeded Zhou Wen's expectations. Su Miantu and company stormed their way to the periphery of the test zone, but they didn't stop. Instead, they charged straight out of the test zone. Li Xian, we have already left the test zone. Shouldn't we head back? Zhou Wen said to Li Xian. Before Li Xian could say a word, Su Miantu said with contempt, "The test zone is only that big. The number of skeleton soldiers is extremely limited. Even if we snatch all of them, how many can there be? If you are afraid, wait here for us. There's no need to follow." Chapter 20. When Zhou Wen saw the trio's expressions, he knew that his persuasion was useless. He had the intention of staying behind and ignoring their fates, but if Li Xian and company were to die inside, his results would be greatly affected. It would probably be difficult for him to be recruited by a top school. Also, Yu Qiubai had introduced him to help Li Xian achieve good result. Although Li Xian didn't think so, Zhou couldn't just watch Li Xian send himself to his death. That would sully Yu Qiubai's reputation, and the Li family might even find trouble with him. Let's hope they don't venture too deep. As long as they don't approach the Skeleton General's region, there shouldn't be too much of a problem. With this thought in mind, Zhou didn't speak further as he followed Li Xian and company. When Su Miantu noticed Zhou silence, he imagined that Zhou didn't dare stay behind alone. He snorted coldly and said, "A burden should have the awareness to be one. Just follow obediently and cut the crap." Zhou had no interest or time to bother with him. He took out his phone, secretly dripped a drop of blood, and entered the ancient Imperial City dungeon. He first wanted to probe the skeleton's strength in-game. It was best if he could find a way to kill it. Even if he couldn't, he had to find a way to survive in front of it. After all, with Jiang Hao and Su Miantu leading the way and killing the skeleton soldiers that charged at them, Zhou had nothing else to do. There was even less danger. Even if a skeleton soldier charged at him, Zhou could easily finish them off with his present strength. Zhou kept walking at the back, unafraid that they would see the game screen. Even if they saw it, it would be difficult for them to recognize it. The game screen was in the style of a cartoon. It looked very different from the style in reality, so most people wouldn't think in that direction. Li Xian was the same as Zhou. He had nothing to do, so when he saw Zhou taking out his phone to game in such a place, he quipped, "You really are a gaming fan. You still have the mood to game in such a place? Since I have nothing to do, I might as well play games to pass the time." Zhou replied without looking up. His gaze was fixed on the game screen as he controlled the blood-colored avatar to ride the mutated vigor ant. The ordinary skeleton soldiers were unable to stop the mutated vigor ant at all. Their bodies scattered upon impact, and they were not as fast as the mutated vigor ant. Zhou wasn't in the mood to kill them. All he wanted to do was rush to the skeleton general's location. "That's true. Then I'll play a little too." As Li Xian spoke, he took out his phone and pointed at it. It was unknown what he was playing. It was fine if Li Xian was gaming, but Zhou was also gaming. It left Su Miantu pissed. What the heck? Is this the #1 genius of Guide High School? He's basically a gaming nerd, Su Miantu cursed in displeasure. Although Su Miantu and Jiang Hao were powerful, they were still made of flesh and blood. They would tire and be injured. Therefore, they were very careful when encountering a large number of skeleton soldiers. They didn't advance very quickly. On the other hand, Zhou charged forward at a speed much faster than theirs. In about half an hour, he once again saw the skeleton general riding the skeleton horse. Just like the first time, the fellow immediately charged at them the moment it saw the blood-colored avatar and the mutated vigor ant. Its speed was terrifying, something Zhou and the mutated vigor ant couldn't compare with. This time, Zhou had already focused 120% to deal with his spear art. However, when he saw the bone spear thrust at him, he failed to dodge it. He didn't even have the chance to stretch out his hand to parry before his chest was pierced. What a fast spear! It's no doubt a primordial energy skill. Zhou was now certain that the spear was a primordial energy skill, otherwise it was impossible for it to be so fast that he couldn't react in time. A speed-type primordial energy skill? This fellow might be harder to deal with than the silver-winged flying ant, but the silver-winged flying ant doesn't seem to have used any primordial energy skills before. As Zhou pondered, he revived the blood-colored avatar and rode the mutated vigor ant before rushing deep into ancient sovereign city. As Zhou rushed, he carefully recalled the details of his 2 deaths, hoping to find a way to deal with them. On careful thought, Zhou came up with a few possibilities. However, He needed to test them to know if they were feasible. When he saw the skeleton general charge at him again, Zhou deliberately avoided the skeleton horse's frontal charge. He wanted to know if the bone spear's primordial energy skill only had the ability to stab forward. However, reality proved him wrong. When Zhou controlled the blood-colored avatar to flash to the side of the skeleton horse, the bone spear's tip streaked across like a stream of light, instantly severing the blood-colored avatar's neck. It was an instant kill without any suspense. Making a mistake wasn't terrifying. What was terrifying was not having the chance to correct it. And the mysterious phone's ability gave Zhou a chance to correct it. His primordial energy skill isn't just a stab. It also has a side slash. This will be difficult to deal with. Zhou wasn't discouraged as he secretly dripped another drop of blood onto the phone's screen. Perhaps it was because he had lost too much blood over the past month or so. Zhou felt a little dizzy. I have to think of a way to replenish my blood in the future. If this continues, I might really die from excessive blood loss. Zhou felt a slight headache, but he couldn't think of a good solution. With his first experiment failing, Zhou had no choice but to switch to another method. Thankfully, he was only attempting it in-game. If it were in real life, he wouldn't do anything beyond his capabilities. After all, he only had one life. He couldn't play around with it. While Zhou was making his attempts, Su Miantu and company were constantly pushing forward. The dimensional creatures in the dimensional zones were nearly endless. As dimensional zones were connected to dimensional rifts, there would be creatures passing through dimensional rifts to enter the dimensional zones from time to time. Therefore, even if they were all killed now, there would still be creatures occupying the area after a period of time. There was no end to the number of killing. However, dimensional rifts weren't stable. It wasn't like there would be creatures coming over at any time. Therefore, after clearing them, there wouldn't be any skeleton soldiers appearing in a short period of time. Su Miantu and company's advancement was rather fast. The chances of skeleton soldiers producing dimensional crystals were just too low. After killing 200 to 300 skeleton soldiers, they only managed to dig out a strength dimensional crystal from a skeleton soldier's body. Unfortunately, this wasn't in-game. They could only roughly tell that it was a strength crystal, but they didn't know what level it was. The strength crystal naturally belonged to Li Xian. In fact, as long as he had this dimensional crystal, he was already first in the team. Chapter 21. Before Li Xian could say a word, Su Miantu said, "It's still early. This bit of bone beads isn't enough to guarantee first place. We naturally have to continue forward." Jiang Hao looked at the map and said, "From the map, this is still a safe zone. There shouldn't be too much danger if we continue forward for another 10 kilometers or so." Li Xian opened the map on his phone and nodded after looking at it. According to the information, there aren't any legendary creatures in the vicinity. It's fine if we continue forward. We have to obtain enough bone beads. We can't afford to lose Guide City's ranking as first in the combat test. Zhou knew that he had to dissuade Li Xian and company from continuing forward. If they encountered the skeleton general and any one of them died, it would greatly affect his results. Although Zhou didn't plan on entering high society through school, he wanted to get into a top university. If one of the 4 died, the chances of them getting into a top university would be slim. No matter how good their results in other subjects were, they could only get into a top university. This wasn't what Zhou wished for. "Li Xian, do you believe in the existence of a sixth sense in this world?" Zhou pondered for a moment before asking Li Xian. "What do you mean?" Li Xian didn't give a direct answer as he looked at Zhou with piqued interest. "I think my sixth sense is stronger than the average person's. Ever since I was young, I would have a vague feeling if I were to encounter danger. This feeling makes me very uncomfortable. Although I don't know if it's a sign of danger, I would quickly encounter trouble every time I have this uncomfortable feeling." After a pause, Zhouwen continued, "And now, I'm feeling extremely uncomfortable. If you're afraid, then be afraid. Why talk about a sixth sense? You sure are something," Su Miantu said disdainfully. Li Xian sized up Zhouwen for a moment before casting his gaze at Jiang Hao. Jiang Hao thought for a moment and said, "The number of bone beads we have isn't enough to guarantee our team first place. It doesn't seem appropriate to return just like that." Clearly, Jiang Hao had the intention to continue forward. Seeing that Li Xian was somewhat tempted, Zhouwen hurriedly said, "Li Xian, please believe me. Although this feeling doesn't appear every time I encounter danger, as long as this feeling appears, I will definitely encounter huge trouble. If I was just afraid of death, I could have retreated back to the entrance and waited for you. There was no need to say all this." After a pause, Zhouwen continued, "Just as Su Miantu said, Guide City is only a tiny place. There aren't many high school students here, so it's unlikely that many would dare cross the designated region to hunt skeleton soldiers. Now that we have obtained so many bone beads, we can return to the designated region to continue hunting skeleton soldiers. First place is still in the bag, so there's no need to take any risk. After all, you only have one life. It's not wrong to be careful." "That makes sense." Li Xian seemed to be moved by Zhouwen's words as he nodded and said, "Then let's do that. Let's head back and hunt skeleton soldiers in other directions." "There's no need at all," Su Miantu grumbled, but he didn't dare defy Li Xian's decision. He turned around and followed Li Xian back. Jiang Hao also followed and walked to Li Xian's side. Zhouwen naturally had already turned around to head back, but after taking 2 steps, he suddenly heard Jiang Hao exclaim, "What's that?" Everyone jumped in fright as they couldn't help but turn their heads to look at him. They saw him looking at an ancient building beside him in horror, as though he had seen something extremely terrifying. Zhouwen, Li Xian, and Su Miantu subconsciously turned their heads, but at that moment, a cold glint flashed in Jiang Hao's hands as a strange jade dagger appeared. The jade dagger in Jiang Hao's left hand stabbed into Li Xian's waist like a venomous snake's tongue. The foot-long jade blade was completely lodged in. This turn of events was too sudden. Before Su Miantu could react, the other jade dagger in Jiang Hao's right hand had already slashed at his neck. Su Miantu had already retreated very quickly, but his neck had still been sliced open. Although it didn't sever his main artery, it instantly dyed his neck red with blood. "Jiang Hao, what are you doing?" Su Miantu wore a look of horror as he held the wound on his neck. As he retreated, he yelled, as though he couldn't believe what had happened. Jiang Hao ignored Su Miantu as he clenched the pair of jade daggers tightly, his eyes staring intently at the wound on Li Xian's waist. The wound had been left by his dagger, so he knew very well what effects it would have. But now, the muscles and fat around the wound seemed to be pulled back by some force. It was squeezing the wound, causing only a tiny amount of blood to seep out. This was nearly impossible for a wound of that degree. I never expected that the Li family's third young master, who is rumored to be ludicrous and promiscuous, would actually master the invincible connate divine art that requires a virgin's body, Jiang Hao said slowly as he stared at Li Xian. Zhouwen was similarly astonished when he heard the words, invincible connate divine art. Primordial energy skills and companion beasts could be obtained by hunting dimensional creatures. Only primordial energy arts couldn't be obtained through dimensional crystals. Legend had it that primordial energy arts originated from ancient qigong, battle qi, ninjutsu, and other techniques. However, primordial energy crystals didn't exist in the past, so those techniques lacked the support of primordial energy and were unable to produce their true might. Only when dimensional creatures appeared and humans absorbed primordial energy crystals did those techniques become useful, gradually forming the primordial energy arts of today. Primordial energy arts were extremely useful to humans. Humans could grow and evolve by absorbing dimensional crystals, but it was difficult for them to cross major levels. As for primordial energy arts, they had the power to break through the limitations of one level. Just like Zhou, if he wanted to advance from the mortal stage to the legendary stage, just absorbing dimensional crystals wasn't enough. He needed to raise ascetic meditation to the next realm before his body could evolve to the legendary stage. However, primordial energy arts also had their pros and cons. Ascetic meditation could at most advance Zhou to the legendary stage, but that was already the limit of the primordial energy art. No matter how he cultivated it in the future, he wouldn't be able to advance to the epic stage. Among the known primordial energy arts, there were less than 20 that could advance humans to the epic stage. The invincible connate divine art was one of them. The invincible connate divine art had a strange requirement, and that was to cultivate it with the body of a virgin. The body of a virgin was also the body of a virgin. Chapter 22. Due to its strange cultivation requirements, the invincible connate divine art was also known as the Virgin's divine art. It was one of the epic primordial energy arts with the least number of people cultivating it. Firstly, it was because the invincible connate divine art could only be cultivated by men. Women, who made up more than half of humanity, were unable to cultivate it. Furthermore, only virgins could cultivate this primordial energy art, making it even rarer. No matter how powerful the invincible connate divine art was, the moment it failed, one would become a cripple. This flaw was just too fatal. Of course, the typical person had no chance of coming into contact with the invincible connate divine art. Even if they wanted to cultivate it, they didn't have the chance. If it were anyone else cultivating the invincible connate divine art, Zhou wouldn't have been surprised. However, Li Xian, a fellow who spent his days surrounded by women, had actually managed to cultivate the invincible connate divine art. It was truly unbelievable. Li Xian didn't look at the wound on his waist. In fact, due to the contraction and compression of his muscles, the wound was no longer bleeding. "Did my brother send you?" Li Xian stared at Jiang Hao and asked. He wasn't as clueless as Su Miantu. Jiang Hao nodded and said, "I originally thought that my brother's actions were unnecessary, but from the looks of it, it's because he has a unique eye. You spend your days surrounded by women, yet you are able to maintain your virginity and master the invincible connate divine art. You are truly a rare genius. You will definitely be a thorn in my side in the future." "Jiang Hao, are you mad? You are actually helping Li Mabai kill Brother Xian. Don't you know that if Brother Xian were to die here, we wouldn't be able to answer to Godfather? Besides, we are indebted to Godfather. He dotes on Brother Xian the most, so how can you bear to make him sad?" Su Miantu said as he held his wound. His injuries were a lot lighter than Li Xian's, but unfortunately, he didn't have the invincible connate divine art. Just the blood that flowed out was enough to make him feel dizzy. Jiang Hao ignored Su Miantu as he clenched his dagger tightly. He stared intently at Li Xian like a wolf that was about to devour him. Su Miantu still wanted to say something, but he was interrupted by Li Xian. Li Xian looked at Jiang Hao and said, "I've never fought with second brother over anything since I was young. To prevent him from suspecting me, I'd rather throw myself into the bushes of women and never ask about the Li family's matters. I never expected him to be unwilling to let me off. A mountain cannot have two tigers, and a family cannot have two masters. You can only blame yourself for acting as a pig instead of a real pig. Otherwise there wouldn't be so much trouble," Jiang Hao said. "Jiang Hao, do you really think you can kill me?" Li Xian said coldly. "I've told you so much because I'm determined to kill you. For you to be able to master the invincible connate divine art, you are indeed terrifying beyond my imagination. Unfortunately, you are only at the mortal stage and have yet to advance to the legendary stage. Therefore, you will definitely die today," said Jiang Hao as he tore off his left sleeve, revealing his entire left arm. There were rings of bluish-green tattoos on his left arm. It was a coiled snake tattoo that nearly occupied Jiang Hao's entire left arm. The snake tattoo shimmered with a demonic greenish-blue glow as though it had come to life. Bluish-green snake scales appeared one after another, wrapping around Jiang Hao's entire left arm and left hand. It made his left arm look like a strange venomous snake that looked extremely strange and demonic. Legendary companion beast, explosive scaled snake. Impossible. You are only at the mortal stage. How can you incubate a legendary companion beast? Could it be that you have already advanced to the legendary stage? A 16-year-old at the legendary stage. That's impossible. Su Miantu stared at Jiang Hao's left arm as he exclaimed, his face filled with horror. Jiang Hao shook his head slightly and said, I haven't advanced to the legendary stage. I can only use the legendary explosive scaled snake. How can you incubate a legendary explosive scaled snake without advancing to the legendary stage? The primordial energy needed to incubate the explosive scaled snake egg is enough to drain a mortal stage body dry. There's no way to successfully incubate it. Su Miantu was still in disbelief. Li Xian snorted coldly and said, Second brother really went all out to kill me. To have a legendary companion beast at the mortal stage without needing to incubate it yourself, there's only one way. It's to make a legendary expert with a legendary companion beast pay an extremely painful price that might even cost his life to transfer his legendary companion beast to the mortal stage. You are indeed smart. Although it's a pity you have to die today. Jiang Hao didn't hesitate as he rushed at Li Xian. At the same time, his snake-like arm slashed at Li Xian with the jade dagger. Fast, it was just too fast. The snake-like arm flashed, making it impossible to capture its trajectory with the naked eye. It transformed into a demonic bluish-green stream of light that flashed past Li Xian's neck. The speed was just too fast, even faster than the skeleton general's spear. Zhou believed that Li Xian was doomed. However, to his surprise, he heard a clang. Li Xian's hand had grabbed the jade dagger that was like a phantom, causing it to freeze in front of him. As for Li Xian's hand that held the jade dagger, no, it should be said that most of his body was covered in black iron armor. A legendary companion beast, Black Knight. So you also used such a method to obtain a legendary companion beast at the mortal stage. It's no wonder you are so fearless. Jiang Hao instantly recognized Li Xian's black iron armor. No, you're wrong. I don't need to use such a cruel method to obtain a legendary companion beast, nor is there a need for it. Li Xian exerted strength in his palm as the jade dagger immediately snapped in his palm. Jiang Hao retreated while holding the dagger's remnant hilt. The invincible connate divine art is the primordial energy art with the most abundant primordial energy among all primordial energy arts in the world. Even though I'm only at the mortal stage, I have the chance of taking the risk to incubate a legendary companion beast. Although I can only incubate weaker companion beasts at the legendary stage and have to take some risks, it's enough to deal with your explosive scaled snake. Li Xian's gaze was as sharp as a blade as he approached Jiang Hao. It's no wonder second brother treats you as a huge threat. Such talent is indeed terrifying. As Jiang Hao spoke, he slowly retreated. After saying that, he suddenly turned around and ran deep into the ancient city. Li Xian didn't hesitate as he chased after him. Don't chase after him. When Zhou saw that Jiang Hao was fleeing in the direction of the skeleton general, he hurriedly shouted to stop Li Xian. However, Li Xian clearly had the intention to kill as he chased after Jiang Hao without any hesitation. Their speed was probably 8 or 9, so it was already too late by the time Zhou chased up to them. Soon, they pulled apart as they turned a corner and vanished. Zhou slowed down and didn't continue chasing. Instead, it was Su Miantu who chased after them after treating the wound on his neck. What are you waiting for? Aren't you going to help Brother Xian? Su Miantu shouted at Zhou when he saw him stop. Chapter 23. Coward, Su Miantu cursed softly before ignoring Zhou Wen and chasing after him. Zhou Wen didn't mind. He also wished to help Li Xian, but there was nothing he could do if he chased after him. Jiang Hao and Li Xian had legendary companion beasts, but he didn't. Only death awaited him if he encountered the Skeleton General, so he might as well find a way to deal with the Skeleton General in-game. Perhaps it might be of some use. The reason why Zhou Wen wanted to help Li Xian was because he knew very well that after Jiang Hao killed Li Xian, he would definitely silence him and Su Miantu to ensure his own safety. Jiang Hao had exposed his intentions when he attacked Su Miantu. If Su Miantu successfully killed Li Xian, there was no way he would spare Zhou Wen. Therefore, Zhou Wen helping Li Xian was also helping himself. However, it was useless even if he wanted to help. The might of a legendary companion beast wasn't something he could match. Be it against Jiang Hao or the Skeleton General, the chances of him being killed were very high. As Zhou Wen slowly walked forward, he controlled the blood-colored avatar to charge deep into ancient Imperial City. He didn't know what would happen when Li Xian and Jiang Hao encountered the Skeleton General, so he wanted to make some preparations. Before the blood-colored avatar under Zhou Wen's control encountered the Skeleton General in-game, he heard a blood-curdling roar coming from deep within the ancient city. Defend the city to the death. Defend the city to the death. Zhou Wen's expression changed slightly. The voice clearly didn't come from Jiang Hao or Li Xian, but he hadn't heard the Skeleton General speak while he was in-game. With just a thought, Zhou Wen's state of mind returned to normal as he continued focusing on his phone. The surrounding environment didn't affect his thoughts. Soon, the blood-colored avatar found the Skeleton General in-game. After numerous failed attempts, Zhou Wen had a rough idea of the Skeleton General's strength and primordial energy skill. He knew very well that his strength wasn't enough to fight the Skeleton General, especially when it came to speed. The difference was just too great. It was difficult for him to even dodge and stall for time. The Skeleton General is stronger than me in every aspect. There's a high chance that he's a legendary dimensional creature. It's impossible for me to fend him off, but he's not completely flawless. His bone spear is too long and isn't suitable for melee combat. Furthermore, the skeleton horse he's riding will definitely affect his lower 3 attack paths, causing him to have blind spots. Zhou Wen controlled the blood-colored avatar to face the Skeleton General once again, turning his thoughts into reality. At the instant the Skeleton General charged over, Zhou Wen controlled the blood-colored avatar to advance instead of retreating. With a forward roll, he charged to the skeleton horse's left abdomen. Zhou Wen's timing was impeccable, causing the Skeleton General to have no choice but to retract his spear and stab again due to the skeleton horse's obstruction. By the time the Skeleton General stabbed down with its spear again, Zhou Wen had already crawled under the skeleton horse's abdomen and rolled to the other side. After all, the skeleton horse wasn't the Skeleton General himself. It was difficult for the two to perfectly fuse, allowing Zhou Wen to find a chance of survival. Unfortunately, the Skeleton General was just too strong. Zhou Wen had to constantly circle around the skeleton horse to avoid being stabbed by the bone spear. He had no chance to counterattack. However, in less than 30 seconds, the blood-colored avatar was stabbed to the ground by the Skeleton General's spear. Blood immediately splattered the ground as it died on the spot. Looking at the black screen, Zhou Wen carefully recalled the battle that had just happened. He heard shouts and collisions as he turned a corner. Immediately, he saw Li Xian and Jiang Hao fighting on the other side of the stone street. And in reality, the Skeleton General was also there. In reality, the Skeleton General was dressed in a dyed cloak. The skeleton horse he was riding was tall and majestic, its body like jade. Its bone spear had terrifying barbs on it, and blood-colored flames burned in its eye socket. It looked extremely ferocious. This was a completely different existence from the cartoonish Skeleton General in-game. Zhou Wen almost couldn't recognize it. What puzzled Zhou Wen even more was that the skeleton general was charging around on the skeleton horse, but his target was ultimately Li Xian. As for Jiang Hao, he treated him as air. He didn't attack Jiang Hao once from beginning to end. Strange, why is the skeleton general only attacking Li Xian? Zhou Wen couldn't help but frown as he looked at the wretched Li Xian, who was retreating while still suffering from injuries. However, when Zhou Wen carefully sized up Jiang Hao, he immediately came to a realization. It was unknown when Jiang Hao had a bone breastplate on him. Grayish-white ribs pierced out of his clothes, protecting his chest and back. It looked a little strange. From the looks of it, the skeleton general's refusal to attack Jiang Hao has something to do with the bone armor on him. Zhou Wen knew that it was likely a manifestation of a companion beast, but he didn't know what kind of companion beast it was. Although Su Miantu had a foul mouth, he didn't seem to be a bad person. When he saw Li Xian in danger, he actually charged forward to help. However, the outcome was obvious. In a single exchange, he was sent flying by the skeleton general's spear. He rolled far away on the stone street and slammed into a brick wall before coming to a stop. Su Miantu arched his back like a shrimp as he held his abdomen with both hands. His mouth was filled with blood and his forehead was covered in cold sweat the size of beans. From his expression, he looked like he was in great pain. "There's no rush to your death. Once I kill Li Xian, I'll naturally send you on your way," Jiang Hao said coldly as the dagger in his hand stabbed at Li Xian's vitals like a ghost. Li Xian was fighting 1 against 2. Furthermore, he wasn't at the legendary stage. He was only fighting with his legendary black warrior companion beast, so it was rather difficult for him to hold on. The black armor on his body was damaged in many places as blood seeped out. However, he had an extremely resolute personality. Despite being in such a dire situation, he was still able to maintain a clear mind, allowing him to avoid most of the lethal attacks. Unfortunately, Li Xian wasn't a true legendary expert after all. Compared to the skeleton general, he was inferior. Furthermore, he was being besieged by Jiang Hao. Every second was fraught with peril. If not for the Black Knight armor's extremely strong defense and the invincible Khanate divine art's ability to slow down the deterioration of his injuries, he would have long been killed. Zhou Wen watched for a moment before suddenly shouting at Li Xian, "Li Xian, if I help you hold back the skeleton general, how long will it take for you to finish Jiang Hao?" Zhou Wen's words left Li Xian, Jiang Hao, and Su Miantu taken aback. The present battle was no longer something a mortal stage could intervene in, much less a battlefield ordinary high schoolers could participate in. Su Miantu felt that Zhou Wen had to be crazy. Unfortunately, he didn't have the strength to speak, otherwise he would have mocked Zhou Wen. Although Jiang Hao didn't believe that Zhou Wen was crazy, he didn't believe that Zhou Wen could do anything. Even if he were to rush forward to help Li Xian, he would only be throwing his life away. 2 minutes. I need that much time, Li Xian said without any hesitation as he risked his life. Chapter 24. Zhou Wen's pace gradually sped up as he entered the battlefield at an extremely opportune moment, appearing behind the skeleton general. The skeleton general acutely noticed Zhou Wen's appearance and gave up attacking Li Xian. With a backhand stab, the bone spear transformed into a cold beam that stabbed at Zhou Wen's head. Zhou Wen didn't wait for the skeleton general to raise its spear. He crouched down and tunneled under the skeleton horse's abdomen, preventing the bone spear from aiming at his body. He nullified the skeleton general's stab. Su Miantu struggled to get up as he looked at Zhou Wen in disbelief. Zhou Wen had actually succeeded in holding back the skeleton general. Zhou Wen, who was circling around the skeleton horse and occasionally using the donkey roll, looked wretched, but he had managed to hold back the skeleton general. Su Miantu knew how difficult it was. He had the same plan as Zhou Wen, hoping to hold back the skeleton general to give Li Xian the space to finish off Jiang Hao. However, just as he approached the skeleton general, he was struck by a spear, nearly dying from serious injuries. It made him deeply realize the huge gap between the mortal stage and the legendary stage. Zhou was also at the mortal stage, but he was able to hold back the skeleton general. Despite looking wretched, he wasn't injured at all. This left Su Miantu somewhat incredulous. Su Miantu recalled the mockery he had used against Zhou as his pale face suffused a strange blush. Jiang Hao couldn't help but be alarmed when he saw that Zhou had managed to hold back the skeleton general. He had never expected a mortal stage high school student to be able to hold back a legendary stage skeleton general. In fact, Jiang Hao had long known that the skeleton general had appeared nearby. He had planned on bringing Li Xian nearby and using the skeleton general to finish him off. Unfortunately, this plan had been foiled by Zhou. Jiang Hao had no choice but to take action personally, but he ultimately failed. While Zhou was holding back the skeleton general, Li Xian had already rushed towards Jiang Hao. His fists flashed like meteors as he struck Jiang Hao one punch after another. He knew that it was unrealistic to let a mortal stage person hold back the skeleton general for long periods of time. He had to finish Jiang Hao before Zhou was killed by the skeleton general. Jiang Hao now truly felt how terrifying Li Xian was. He had also used a legendary companion beast and had 2 legendary companion beasts on him, but he was still nearly suffocated by Li Xian. I don't believe that I can't even last 2 minutes with a legendary companion beast at the mortal stage. Jiang Hao gritted his teeth as he fought Li Xian. Bang! In just over 10 seconds, Jiang Hao was punched in the left rib by Li Xian, shattering 2 of the bone armor on his left rib. Jiang Hao's expression changed as he quickly retreated. However, when he saw Li Xian chasing after him like maggots, a ruthless glint flashed in his eyes. With a flick of his left arm, the violent scaled serpent tattoo shimmered. A blue-green viper tore out of his arm and coiled around Li Xian. Seizing the opportunity when Li Xian was entangled by the violent scaled snake, Jiang Hao's figure burst forth, instantly covering a distance of 4 to 5 meters. The dagger in his hand silently stabbed towards Zhou back. Ah! This sudden turn of events gave Su Miantu a fright. It was already perilous for Zhou to hold back the skeleton general. Now, with Jiang Hao sneaking up on him from behind, it was certain death. Li Xian was alarmed and infuriated as well, but with the violent scaled snake in his way, it was too late for him to save Zhou. The bone spear thrust over like lightning as the dagger behind him silently stabbed at Zhou's lower back. At this moment of life and death, Zhou exerted strength in his legs, turning his body to the side. His waist muscles produced a powerful torque, turning his waist and twisting his upper body into a strange angle. Zhou's legs were still facing the skeleton general, but his upper body had already turned to face Jiang Hao. The bone spear nearly brushed past Zhou's cheek, leaving behind a thin line of blood. However, Zhou's expression didn't change at all. He didn't even blink as he punched at Jiang Hao's dagger. A look of mockery flashed in Jiang Hao's eyes. Although the violent scaled snake had left his body, the bone breastplate he was wearing was also a legendary companion beast. Although it wasn't a strength-type companion beast, it augmented his strength slightly. It was definitely not something an ordinary mortal stage human could withstand. Furthermore, the jade dagger was made of special materials. Not only did it have the ability to kill dimensional creatures, it also had terrifying sharpness. Die! Jiang Hao turned ruthless as he squeezed all his strength to the limits. He gathered it on the blade, hoping to cleave off Zhou's finger bones. Dodge! You can't receive it! Li Xian shouted anxiously. Su Miantu spat out another mouthful of blood, but this time, it was because he was anxious and not because of his injuries. At the instant the fist and blade clashed, Zhou's fist shimmered with a blood-colored luster. A red carapace instantly enveloped his fist, condensing into a dark red glove. Companion beast. Jiang Hao's pupils constricted as an ominous feeling arose in him. As there were just too few mortal stage companion beasts, he subconsciously imagined that they were legendary stage companion beasts. He was alarmed. However, the distance between the fist and the blade was just too close. Just as this thought arose in Jiang Hao's mind, Zhou Wen's fist had already collided with the jade dagger's blade. Kacha! Under the powerful impact, the edge of the jade dagger was directly smashed open. Cracks spread rapidly, causing the entire dagger to shatter into fragments that filled the sky. Bam! Zhou Wen's fist didn't stop as it struck Jiang Hao's dagger-wielding fist, shattering Jiang Hao's fist along with the bones in his arm. Broken bones protruded from his muscles as blood splattered everywhere. Without the protection of the bone armor, his entire arm exploded like popcorn. Jiang Hao screamed in pain as he was sent flying. All of this happened in a split second. When Su Miantu saw what had happened, he widened his eyes and mouth, unable to say a word. Li Xian was delighted. Ignoring the explosive scaled snake that was coiling around him, he charged forward and smashed Jiang Hao's head in midair with a punch. He didn't give Jiang Hao any chance. Zhou Wen's mind was as calm as water. After smashing Jiang Hao's arm, he turned around like a loach and rolled, tunneling under the skeleton horse's legs and arriving behind it. He made the skeleton general, which was about to strike, lose its target once again. All of his actions were fluid without any sloppiness. It was as though he had practiced it countless times. It was pleasing to the eye. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.